In recognition of guests, the Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon, and welcome to my colleagues back for another day of important debate in this legislative chamber. I want to welcome all those who are tuned in online across PEI, members of our media who do a wonderful job of taking what takes place here and share it with Islanders from tip to tip. I want to make special mention, Mr. Speaker, of three individuals who have joined us in the public gallery today. I had a chance, I believe, what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition did as well, to meet today with U.S. Consul General from the Halifax office, Lyra Carr, and her political staff, her political and economic specialist, Gary Logan, who are joined us here. The Consul General took her position up last July in Halifax. And this is the first time she's been able to officially come to Prince Edward Island, and we were very honored to welcome her here today. We've had a number of virtual events. We've talked a lot on the phone, and she expressed a great desire to get to Prince Edward Island as quickly as she could, and I'm very, very honored that she was here. We had a very productive discussion, as we often do. We talked about the important relationship we have economically and what an important trade partner both our countries are. But also we talk often about the incredible connection we have as an Atlantic and maritime region with, in particular, the northeastern part of the United States, and how many of our former citizens have moved down there, and that close connection we have. And it's been especially important for me personally and for our government, the role that the current Consul General played in helping to keep the lines of communication open during the potato situation we were facing these past number of months. And I know that the work that she put in went a long way to getting us to the resolution that we found, I guess, a few weeks ago now. So. And I was also happy to learn today that the U.S. Consulate Office in Halifax is the oldest one and the most longest serving one in Canada for the government of the United States. So that just shows what an important and long relationship we've had here. It was a great privilege and honor for me to welcome her officially here today. And I know they had a productive couple of days here. And I want to thank our Chief of Protocol, Debbie Atkinson, who works so hard behind the scenes to facilitate visits of these special and important members who come to our province. So I hope you enjoy the proceedings today. I think they will be a little different than what you might see on Capitol Hill, but you never know in here. Sometimes even the niceties can be put aside, and we can have a spirited discussion. But it always, in Prince Edward Island, thankfully comes from a place of concern and overall well-being for the citizens of this province. So I really want to welcome you here today. I also want to say, Mr. Speaker, that I had a great conversation this morning with Gerard Turk-Gallant, who, of course, native of Summerside, who was the head coach of the New York Rangers. They picked up their 50th win last night. They're now tied for first in the Metropolitan Division. And now that it appears my beloved Montreal Canadiens are going to fall just a little bit short of the playoffs this year, I'm proud to stand here today and say that I've thrown my full support behind the New York Rangers, and I would encourage all Islanders to do so. We have Turk-Gallant as the head coach. We have Mike Kelly from Shamrock as the assistant coach. We have the pride of Murray Harbour, Brad Richards, in the front office. This should be the Islands team. I know that there's members in here who think otherwise, but seeing what the Toronto Maple Leafs have done over the years, Mr. Speaker, we can't get behind that team as Islanders. And we have to find a way to get behind Turk. And in typical Turk fashion, just to know everyone that how much he loves PEI and misses PEI, the first thing he talked about was, I heard there was a windy night in PEI last night, and he was really happy to see the Western Capitals doing so well. So even though he's in the middle of Manhattan, Mr. Speaker, and he's the toast of the city that never sleeps, his heart is still here in PEI, and he can't wait to get back. But we're both hoping, of course, now that I'm a Rangers fan through and through, Mr. Speaker, we're hoping that is late July before we see Turk here in PEI, and maybe he'll bring the Stanley Cup with him. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I too would like to welcome our guests today. I had a lovely, lovely meeting yesterday with Lyra Carr and Gary and Debbie, and we meet a lot of people in our jobs, and I just found, and I'd never met Ms. Carr before, but I just found her absolutely unassuming, friendly, sincerely keen to find out about Prince Edward Island, the history of Prince Edward Island, the political traditions of Prince Edward Island, and the spirit of the place. And I think already today you have probably a sense of what that is like, and this is not an unusual way to start proceedings here in our legislation. And for that, I think all of us here are very grateful, and we don't take that for granted. Anyway, it's delightful to see you here today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your visit on Prince Edward Island. You could be forgiven for thinking you'd stepped into a Sportsnet news broadcast there for a little bit. And sports is very important here on Prince Edward Island, and many of us here follow teams, as you've discovered. But there's a lot of other things that go on here as well on Prince Edward Island. And one of the things I talk about frequently is the cultural milieu that we have here. The breadth and the depth of the artists that we have here, performing artists, visual artists, theater artists, writers, dancers. And they are everywhere, and we're very blessed with that, considering the size of this place and the population. We have an extraordinary arts community here. And one part of that arts community, the PEI Symphony Orchestra, and considering the size of our province, so 160,000 souls, to have a symphony orchestra, a full symphony orchestra supported here, is quite an extraordinary thing, and something that I'm very proud of and was actually a part of before my life became too cluttered with politics to allow me to continue that. And this Sunday they have the finale of their season, their 54th season, and it's a tribute to Ukraine. They'll be playing a lot of music by Ukrainian composers. They will be playing music about Ukraine. They will also be playing music that symbolizes unity and strength and overcoming adversity. And I encourage people to get out to that, although I have to tell you, I got an email from Evan McCaution yesterday, who works with the organization, saying, get your tickets if you're interested in coming. So I went online and looked it up, and there's very few tickets left. This is for the main stage at the Confederation Center. It seats thousands of people. So I'm delighted that that's going to be a well-attended event. And of course, the money raised will be going to very good causes. So again, I encourage any of you who have not been out to see our superb symphony orchestra to do that, because it's great to hear them, but also because this is for a wonderful cause. And as a special sort of added bonus that day, Richard Wood, who's a very well-known island fiddler, will be performing. Debbie knows him, of course, very well from her Small Halls days. So I encourage us all to get out to that. And finally, this morning, I popped into the National Farmers Union AGM, which was in the Milton Community Hall. Really interesting discussion there on all kinds of important agricultural matters. The place was very full. I saw Wayne Easter there. Actually, I hadn't seen him since he retired, so that was a lovely little catch-up I had with him. But there's a lot of great discussions on a range of agricultural issues, and it's always a very spirited group, and I enjoyed being with them, and I wish them well for the year ahead. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's always a privilege to rise and say hello to everyone back in Evangeline, Musquesh, and everyone, all Islanders that are watching today. I too would like to welcome our guests to the gallery, and it's not that often we have a U.S. Consul General in our gallery, and welcome to you, welcome to all of you. I, like the Premier, I have been known to get in different wagons over my hockey fan life, and I will be cheering for Turk's team as well, since our Montreal Canadiens will not be around. And you know, when he was in Vegas, I got a couple of jerseys in my closet from his Vegas days, so we'll probably have to get one from his Ranger days, and I wish them all the best. Mr. Speaker, I had the privilege, as well as the Minister of Social Development, or Social Seniors and Housing, to attend the launch of a book in Rustico this morning at the school there, and this book is called L'Acadie de l'Île de Prince Edward, and it's the history of the Acadians, their contribution to PEI, and their culture and the economic contribution they had. The book was put together by George Arsenault and Linda Lowther, and it's a wonderful book, and I will leave it here in the Legislative Library for everyone that want to have a look at it, and it was certainly a wonderful event. They had the students involved in it and the school staff, and I was very privileged to be there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Winslow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and of course, a welcome to our friends in the gallery. And just a little bit past the gallery is a former goaltender of mine. He's our security here today, Liam J., who is also a Montreal Canadiens fan. And back when he was playing, PK Subban was his favorite player, and so his nickname was PK. So a big hello to Liam. Thanks for joining us. And also, Mr. Speaker, on the weekend, my team, the team that I coached, the Central Storm Orange U11 AA girls, beat the Central Storm Black team 3-2. We scored with 7 seconds left, and I just want to say a big congratulations to all the girls: Sophia Braylin, Caitlin, Molly, Soraya, Madison, Mara, Allie, Eli, Zia, Farah, Kenzie, Sawyer, Emma, Ivy, Sally, and Emily, and our coaches Nick, Drew, Julie, Maggie, and of course our wonderful manager Susie. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today. Welcome everyone watching from District 18, Rustico Emerald, and around the island, and of course our esteemed visitors to the gallery. Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to recognize my son's hockey team. Alex plays with the U13 AAA Mid-Isle Matrix, and they finished a close second place in the final game to the Pownal Red Devils. But Mr. Speaker, I wanted to thank the coaches, Tyson Kelly, Brandon Cobflesh, and Alex Surrett and Trevor Clough, and the managers, Kelly McDonald and Lynn Clough, and of course all the parents for what they do. And I know the member who coaches, who just was up before me, knows how much time and effort it takes and that these volunteers put into it. Mr. Speaker, I also wanted to recognize the book launch that we were at today with the leader of the third party, L'Acadie de l'Île du Prince-Édouard, 300 ans d'histoire, 300 years of history, Mr. Speaker. This is a tool that's going to be used within schools. I was happy to be Minister of Education when we funded that, and I wanted to congratulate Renee Hurchibis from the department who really brought that together, and of course Linda Lowther and George Arsenault who wrote the book, and it was Julie Gagnon was the MC at the ceremony today, and her honor Antoinette Perry, did a fantastic job speaking as well. And finally, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to thank the Adventure Group who officially assumed responsibility of the Community Outreach Centre yesterday. I look forward to working with them over the next weeks and months. And I also want to give up my deepest thanks to the Salvation Army for their instrumental work in helping establish the Outreach Centre as an important community fixture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty, third party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just want to say hello to the guests in the gallery today. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the proceedings. And say hello to everybody in District 14, Charlottetown West Royalty. And I just felt compelled because I had a great conversation, a constituent who watches every day. Just called me, and I talk with her frequently, but last night was different because she was watching estimates yesterday, and she struggles with a lot of health concerns, and she's fighting very hard, but the notion and the discussion about diabetes really got to her, and it affects her, and I think it's a very good discussion. I can't say her name, she won't let me do that, but I know she's watching today, and I just want to let you know that was a powerful conversation, and we'll continue to do good work in here. As well, I just want to say congratulations to Elijah Miller from the UPI Panthers, who just signed a pro contract for this summer. He got picked up. He had an amazing season, so he got picked up. He's going to be playing professional basketball this summer. So congratulations, Elijah.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's all this talk about hockey, so I don't usually comment on hockey, but I do want to mention the humble hockey stick, which is very relevant. I think Gore referred to it when he started to talk about climate change, where I don't even know what it's called, whatever is at the end of the hockey stick, represents the rapid increase in CO2 and climate warming, or when you look at the climate over a few 100,000 years. Nowadays, unfortunately, most governments, be they national, international, or everywhere, their action is usually described as hockey stick action, which is very little action now, and the action is all talked about in the future sometimes. In other generations, future elected government or whatever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Did I miss anyone? No? Member statements. The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A 50-person capacity bus, especially if it is electric and full, is a great way to move a crowd of people efficiently. However, it's not so great with only a few passengers, nor is it a great choice for getting people from where they actually live to the bus stop. You often see people taking their personal car to the bus stop, if they have one, and parking it there. People with no car can walk a kilometre or so, but if longer, they often just don't go at all. So the public transportation system is really designed for those living near the bus stop or those who already have a car. This is never going to get us to the point where all islanders have access to transportation. To imagine what's needed, try to think of why are cars so popular? Surely one of the reasons is the ability to provide a door-to-door service. While I totally agree that people would be better off spending more time walking, there are plenty of times when driving a car is the better option, such as the days when it's cold, rainy, or windy, on the days when you have a kid or two with a stroller in tow, plus groceries, or for those who simply can only manage a few feet of walking because of age or disabilities. On those occasions, what most people would want is a warm, comfortable vehicle at their doorstep, taking them to the bus stop. The perfect vehicle for this is a van. And of course, it should be electric, but let's not get discouraged by the temporary shortage of electric cars. The fact is that even a regular gas van is way more efficient as long as filled with people. A car or van if full is already cutting gas consumption by 75% or more, even if it's not electric. So the most important issue is not whether gas or electric, but to keep cars and vans full. Smaller cars are easier to keep full than big buses, and the smaller vans feeding big buses is exactly what is needed to also keep the buses full. This is why I'm calling vans picking up people at their door the missing link to make public transportation systems work. We need to be able to reach all people wherever they live and to move them in comfort. Otherwise, they'll just continue using the cars they already have, or if they're without a car, just choose not to go at all. If the aim is to fill the bus, we need to subsidize the missing links, the vans that feed the bus as well. It won't take $40 per person, and there are existing services like cab companies and rideshare companies that could take on the challenge and for a modest subsidy bring people to the bus. The aim should be to keep the fare to the new provincial standard of $2. We could do it now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary-Inverness, third party whip.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many islanders are unaware of peat moss and the economic impacts the industry has in this province. O'Leary-Inverness is home to two larger peat bog operations on PEI, Gulf Island Peat, located in Foxley River, and Northern Peat in East Biddeford. These two companies employ close to 50 employees and support industries like farm equipment repair and servicing, to the trucking sector. In fact, the Annapolis Peat, their parent company, is the largest annual purchaser of John Deere tractors in Canada. Peat from PEI has been exported since 1972 to approximately 10 countries, including Japan, Australia, Egypt, and the USA. And it is used in greenhouse agricultural production and transportation of food produce in warmer climate countries. The harvest of peat moss in Foxley River and the existing bogs owned by Gulf Island Peat is coming to an end within the coming decade, and a new site is required to sustain the existing jobs and economic impacts for this region. As MLA for the area, I've met with the owners, the managers. The new sites have been identified, which are on land owned by the province. I have raised questions in this legislature for government to come together with its various PEI departments to decide if the taxes generated by peat harvest and export is something this government is wanting. Gulf Island Peat has sent letters to the Premier requesting his government sit down and meet to determine the future of peat as an export commodity from O'Leary-Inverness. Sadly, and I must say disrespectfully, to the hardworking employees within my riding, to date no response has been returned. This company is willing to trade land with government, invest in PEI, maintain a skilled and dedicated workforce, and harvest the peat in an environmentally sustainable manner, but they need a willing provincial government who wants to help work through the bureaucratic red tape to have a new bog operational before the old bog is decommissioned. As MLA for O'Leary-Inverness, I am calling on the Premier and his ministers to make this happen so these employees can be assured work during these difficult economic times. At the very least, be upfront with this company. If government does not want this industry to continue, do so by putting your decision in writing and respond to their letter.
The honourable member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good governance. It's something that lies beneath every single decision that the Legislative Assembly makes. If we have good governance, we will see good policy emerge. Our system has served us fairly well for a great many years. For most of PEI's political history, two parties dominated the political landscape. Now, of course, we have more than two. If we, however, have bad governance, say with a government that is won over a vast majority of power in the House that is not reflective of the popular vote, then we will get policy that is also skewed in the same way. With more than two parties on the ballot, that old system shows its weaknesses. It happened recently in this province when the PCs were reduced to nearly zero representation in the House. Our system relies on the strong opposition to hold the government to account. We need a system that ensures that. Even when there is a majority government, there is functional opposition. There is a way to mitigate against the huge swings in policy created by polarized parties pulling in different directions. Electoral reform designed to encourage collaboration, proportional representation. Islanders were very happy when they had a collaborative minority government. I'm sure Islanders are anxious to see what the Citizens' Assembly for proportional representation will look like and when they will see it in place doing its work. Once complete, we can have a real conversation on a real option that has all the clear answers to the unaddressed questions that have plagued previous discussions and votes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
End of statements. Questions by members responding to questions taken as noticed. The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday, the member from Charlottetown Victoria Park asked the department how the department determines when to provide a mobile rental voucher, direct to tenant or direct to landlord. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to confirm that the Department of Social Development and Housing provides housing support to individuals in three ways: through placement in senior or family housing complexes, of which we have approximately 1,600 units, through mobile rental vouchers, which allows families or individuals to stay in a community of their choice without having to move to a location where social housing exists, and through number 3, rental supplements, which is an agreement with an independent landlord. And the department provides about 1,200 mobile rental vouchers monthly and supports roughly 400 rental supplements monthly. So, Mr. Speaker, mobile rental voucher benefits are typically provided direct to tenant. Direct to landlord payments are only set up in circumstances where a client has challenges managing the fiscal responsibilities, and roughly 70 to 80% of our mobile rental voucher benefits are set up as direct to tenant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anyone else? No more response? No? For our first question, I'll call on the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. This morning, Statistics Canada released the inflation numbers for March, and for our province, things just keep getting worse. Once again, PEI is leading the country, not in something we want to lead the country in, with 8.9% in growth in prices versus last year. That's versus a national figure of 6.7%. And of course, this morning, there was a rise in gas prices as well. A few weeks ago, this government announced a relief program to help Islanders with these unprecedented price hikes and cost of living. We got a call just this morning, actually, from a constituent who still has not received their cheque and was wondering when it's going to arrive. A question to the Premier. When will the cheques go out for the relief that you announced last month? And since it's absolutely clear that this problem is not going away and is actually getting worse, will this programme be extended into the future?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for the question, and of course it is something that every Prince Edward Islander and every Canadian is concerned about, is the inflationary challenges on the economy and then the cost of living increases that go along with it. In Prince Edward Island, that's largely driven by the cost of fuel and gasoline, Mr. Speaker, and being a province that has to import and export essentially everything we do on wheels, I think that's why we're seeing our increase higher than others. We announced a $20 million program, Mr. Speaker. A good portion of that program has begun to roll out. The individual payments benefits that we are putting out to 75 or 80,000 islanders. I think my last guess, Mr. Speaker, will be delivered in partnership with CRA, Mr. Speaker, and we're hoping we can do that as quickly as possible.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Again, Mr. Speaker. We've been talking to residents of Tignish about how this government has failed them when it comes to providing them with a family doctor. Since 2017, their family doctor has changed 4 times, with the current locum only seeing patients virtually 1 day a month. 1 day a month, virtually. Each time, this family has not been notified by Health PEI that their physician is leaving. A question to the Minister of Health and Wellness. Why is it so difficult for Health PEI to notify islanders when their physician is changing, or worse, when they're leaving completely?
Honourable Premier.
I think he asked the Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question. It certainly is a valid one, Mr. Speaker, and I have inquired as to what the process is when a family physician or a primary care provider is leaving the province. 2 things, Mr. Speaker, that I'll point out. That any primary care provider, family physician, is to provide 8 weeks' notice prior to their departure, and the onus is to be on the family practitioner, the family doctor, to provide information to their clients as to when they are leaving. Is there room for improvements and to work with Health PEI on that, Mr. Speaker? Again, I appreciate the Leader of the Opposition bringing this forward, and certainly I would say yes, we need to continue to work together to make sure that this information is provided to patients, to islanders, in advance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'll offer one very simple piece of advice to the Minister. Take that responsibility out of the hands of the busy physician and put it in Health PEI and get them to notify their patients. Very, very simple thing that the Minister could do tomorrow. It was suggested to this particular family that they should get themselves on that patient registry, which now numbers over 23,000. If an islander, however, does not know that they're about to lose their doctor, they of course would have no idea that they should actually register themselves. A question to the same minister. Why weren't they automatically put on the patient registry months ago?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank the Leader of the Opposition for bringing this matter forward. With regard to the patient registry, yes, the onus is on the islander to make contact, to make sure that their name is placed on the registry, Mr. Speaker. But again, I do appreciate where the Leader of the Opposition is coming from, that obviously if you are going to be losing, for whatever reason, your family doctor, your nurse practitioner, your primary care provider, if you don't know about that, then you can't get on the registry. So there is room for improvement there. Absolutely, and I do agree. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
It would be amusing if it weren't so frustrating the number of times we hear on this side of the House that they agree with the concerns we're bringing forward. But you sometimes forget, Minister, that you're in a position where you can actually do something about this. So, flattered though I am that you agree with our criticism, it's up to you to do something to fix it.
Yes.
Minister, it's devastating for rural communities to lose their physicians. I know that from where I live. Residents in rural communities work really hard to attract their doctors, and they treat them really well when they get there. They realize what an incredibly precious commodity they are. To the Minister, are you aware of any other doctors leaving West Prince in the next couple of months? And you mentioned they have to give 8 weeks' notice, so you would know now if there are any who are leaving. And if so, will you ensure that their patients are notified by Health PI of the changes?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for the question. With regards to the criticism, you know, I could stand here and indicate a number of initiatives that we have worked with, that we've received feedback from the official opposition and the third party, and that we have moved forward on. Specifically with regard to the Leader of the Opposition's question, yes, I am aware of a family physician who has given the 8 weeks' notice. I have spoken with certain patients of that family physician. Yes, and those patients should be and will be notified, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Knowing how busy you are, I hope that responsibility isn't falling to you personally, Minister, although I do appreciate what I think I heard you saying you reached out to some patients, but you have a large staff. Get them to do that. A father up west was in contact with us recently. He had a little boy who had a bad, painful rash that would not go away. The closest walk-in clinic was in Wellington. He lives in Tignish. And the soonest appointment was 6 days away. That's an awful long time for a child in pain. Yesterday, during question period, you said that when it comes to healthcare, your government, unlike the previous one, was getting results. Well, I guess, indeed, you are getting results, just not the ones that Islanders are looking for. Yes. Question to the same minister. Underserving rural Prince Edward Island is causing hardship and suffering to island families. When will you deliver the results that Islanders actually want and need and stand up for rural Islanders?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, thank the member of the Leader of the Opposition for the question. With regard to standing up for rural Islanders, Mr. Speaker, I doubt very much if there has ever been a Minister of Health that has stood up for rural Islanders any more than I have. Mr. Speaker, we are putting in place a new Kings County Memorial Hospital, a new clinic in Kings County. Mr. Speaker, a new community health center in West Prince. All of these initiatives, which the official opposition, for the most part, voted against in the capital budget. So who is standing up for Islanders? Who is standing up for rural Islanders? It is us. We are adding additional family physicians within the complement, which is included in the operating budget, which we are debating presently. And if we're in a position at some point in time to have that budget passed, we could get the wheels moving.
Mermaid Stratford.
A few weeks ago, I asked the Minister of Health and Wellness why he didn't consult with Islanders on the tabled amendments to the Mental Health Act. Mr. Speaker, this is one of the only laws on PEI that removes the person's freedom without committing any crime. Question to the Minister. We've reached out to advocates and organizations who want to provide you with input and with serious concerns about the changes that you've tabled. Since I brought this up, have you consulted with any additional Islanders?
Good question. The Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And personally, have I consulted directly with any additional Islanders? Mr. Speaker, no, I have not. Mr. Speaker, as well, as the honourable member knows, that the legislation, it was brought forward for first reading. It is sitting on the table. But with that, Mr. Speaker, we will be delaying it. We want to make sure that adequate consultation is done on this. Another thing, Mr. Speaker, that we've had the discussions previously as well, is that the Mental Health Act itself is aged, and that we have to look at that. So there will be that consultation process going forward, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Mermaid Stratford.
Mr. Speaker, BIPOC Usher has written a letter regarding these proposed changes stating, and I quote, the heavy medicalization of mental health and the heavy presence of psychiatry above any other mental health care professionals, experts, and stakeholders in this document is extremely concerning and frankly outdated, end quote. Question to the Minister. The Premier committed to move mental health supports forwards, not backwards. Why are you working against this promise that your own Premier made?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the member for the question and giving me the opportunity to indicate where we are moving forward, Mr. Speaker. You look at the complement of psychiatrists. We are the closest to having a full complement that we have been in years. Mr. Speaker, you look at a psychologist. Mr. Speaker, our government recently put in place an incentive for the recruitment of psychologists, which results right now in only one 30% psychologist position being vacant. Mr. Speaker, it did take some time, but we do have the mobile response units up and going. We have the single point of access lines, Mr. Speaker. We have made tremendous strides with regard to providing mental health services for Islanders. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, time and time again, we get legislation tabled in this House that does not ever consult with people with lived experience, nor does it consult with people from marginalized communities.
Lots of examples.
I can't even tell you the number that have had to go back to the drawing board because you haven't consulted.
Yep.
The Mental Health Act is archaic, and the official opposition has been calling on this government to make changes to it so that those changes can happen. And that's been for the last 3 years. And I asked the Premier a couple weeks ago why his government refuses to do the hard work for Islanders. But instead of answering that question, he spoke to something completely unrelated. So question to the Minister, will you answer the question, why in the past 3 years have you not asked for a full review of the Mental Health Act?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, again, thank the member for the question, but we see in the previous questions that the honourable member has brought forward, taking us to task on this side, taking my very hard-working staff to task as well, Mr. Speaker, with regard to not consulting. And now we hear, how come it's not moving faster? Mr. Speaker, we do want to consult, and we will consult. We have initiated programs as well, Mr. Speaker, such as through the Alliance for Mental Well-Being. We realize that we have to not only have the downstream programs for Islanders, but we have to have upstream interventions available as well. And, Mr. Speaker, we will work with community groups right across this great province of ours to ensure that we do have those upstream initiatives in place. Thank you.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And speaking of legislation that has had to go back to the drawing board, we're once again hearing from the government the new Residential Tenancy Act will not be ready until next sitting, something we heard last sitting and the sitting before. They've been working on a draft of the legislation literally for years now and seem to be completely unable to make any progress on it. Kicking the can down the road seems to be the motto of this government. Yeah. Question to the minister, why are you refusing to do the work and get this legislation finished so that tenants can have the protections they so desperately need right now?
Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would say what we're actually doing is we are doing the work to make sure the legislation is where it needs to be so that it provides the protections for tenants and it also serves landlords, Mr. Speaker, so that we have balanced legislation that's going to best serve our housing market and rental market in this province. And Mr. Speaker, you recall that when I was Minister of Education, we had no policy expertise in-house. There was a third-party lawyer that came up with the first draft. I made sure we do have policy staff. They've been working diligently for a year, and at the urging of the official opposition, we're going to continue to work. We're going to work with them. We're going to work with stakeholder groups who I've recently met with, and we're going to get this right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
You couldn't do that in 2 years, and how many times have we heard the same story about not having the expertise? I'm sick and tired of hearing that. These continued delays are making it impossible to believe that this government cares about the rights of tenants and landlords. If we're going to believe that this government is actually committed to fixing the laws for tenants and landlords, they're going to have to prove it. No more kicking the can down the road. We need details. To the minister, what's wrong with your current draft version of the new Residential Tenancy Act that you need to fix? Give me a list.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we're listening to tenants and we're listening to landlords, and they're telling us that our legislation is not ready. And Mr. Speaker, that's why we're continuing to work on it. We're continuing to consult with them. And if the member across was talking to them at all, she would have the full list of their concerns. Mr. Speaker, I'd be happy, to provide that. And we're working with the official opposition as well. I don't know what this member wants. Either we're going too fast, or we're not going fast enough, or are we going to consult her? We're going to do this. We're going to do it right, and we're going to make it happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
For 2 years, you have not been able to do this. Yeah. Your job to consult, we have been, but it's actually not our job. The minister has mentioned, hardly. It's been a very extensive consultation.
Member has the floor.
Thank you, Speaker. The minister has mentioned needing to do more consultation. I do have to wonder what government expects to learn that they haven't learned already in the multiple rounds of consultations over the last 2 years. I'm wondering if it has to do with courage and boldness here.
Yes.
Question to the minister, on what dates will these consultations be happening? Who will be invited? Give me the specifics.
The Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. So a couple of weeks ago, I did meet with the PEI Fight for Affordable Housing. And just the week before that, I met with the RRAP group, which is the Residential Rental Association of Property Owners, Mr. Speaker. They brought forward their concerns. And so what we're working, and I believe there is a meeting scheduled in the future coming up here with official opposition, because we want to hear from you. You have a whole list of amendments that you put forward. Some of them are specific, some of them are general ideas. So, Mr. Speaker, the way it works is you take the feedback, you make changes, you go back and you talk to people again. And so I'm hoping to have those changes made over the coming months, and then we're going to schedule those dates to go back to those exact stakeholders I talked about. We're going to get this done. Thank you.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Let me be clear, there is no meeting scheduled. You keep saying that, but it's not true. The minister has repeatedly in this House blamed the opposition for holding up this bill because we gave you a list of amendments. But he's had our amendments for 6 weeks now, and we haven't heard a peep back. Our amendments are based on what people in the community have been telling us and what they've already told government. None of them should be a surprise. We really just did the work for you.
Yes.
Question to the minister, how does us doing the work for you slow down the process?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on this side of the House, and in particular, it's my goal to consult with all stakeholders that are interested in the legislation, not just one set of stakeholders. And Mr. Speaker, I want to take into account the entire picture. I want to make sure that the legislation is as best it can be for everyone. Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's exaggeration to say that what the official opposition has advocated for and suggested is very, very much one-sided. And Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to work to make sure we get something, and I've said this before as well, this is extremely delicate legislation. It's one where the final version, frankly, is going to be hard to please everybody because it is so controversial, and we're getting very close now, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to keep putting in the hard work to make this happen. Thank you.
Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The official opposition actually had a great meeting with the Residential Landlord Rental Association of PEI, the ones who represent the landlords, and we've met with them more than once. In fact, we've actually been advocating for them since 2019 with our original housing strategy. And one of the things that we've heard consistently from landlords is that they need to be able to do necessary renovations and updates to their properties that improve the property for the tenants living there, but to do so without passing those costs on disproportionately to the tenants. We've advocated for support for landlords, including renovation grants and loans, all the way back to that housing strategy. Question for the Minister, what direct support has your government provided for PEI landlords in the last 2 years?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So, Mr. Speaker, the message coming forward from the official opposition is very confusing to me, because what we've done is we've actually partnered with private developers and nonprofits to create housing on this island, to create rental units. But we hear from the opposition that we shouldn't be doing that, that government should own all the housing and they should buy all the housing up from private landlords, and they shouldn't even exist. So, Mr. Speaker, we are working to support landlords because they are a key part of the solution to make sure that we have enough housing and affordable housing across this island. Mr. Speaker, we have to do this in a way to make sure that the housing that we have is affordable, and we're doing this so that we have measured rent controls in place. PEI is the leading jurisdiction in the country, and we're going to continue to work towards it.
Charlottetown, Belvedere.
Thank you. So the answer is you're not doing anything for small business landlords. And let's remember, 9,000 rental units in PEI are owned by small business landlords. So, Mr. Speaker, they need to be supported too, and that's who we've been talking to. Maybe you should try it, Mr. Minister. One of the alarming things we hear over and over in the community, though, is that rents are rising far more than the 1 to 2% annual limit that IRAC sets. This often happens when renovations are done, and while we like to see improvements being made to homes, we also need to make sure that tenants aren't hit with massive rent increases that they can't pay. One of our amendments proposes to put a 5% cap on these extraordinary rent increases, but we can't bring that forward when the bill's not on the floor. Question to the Minister. Failure to table the RTA is a failure to act. Why won't you stand up for Islanders who are struggling to afford their housing?
The Honourable Member for Social Development and Housing.
So, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that the member from across from Charlottetown Belvedere likes to criticize time and time again are our mobile rental vouchers. And Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what they do. Not only do they help make housing affordable for Islanders who are renting in the spot where they're located, but Mr. Speaker, they also help landlords have the money coming in so they can do things like renovate and continue to offer adequate housing. So, Mr. Speaker, we offer rent supplements as well. We have we call it our Affordable Housing Development Program that's really focused on creating new social housing, but at the same time, guess what it does? It supports landlords in creating new market-priced units. So, Mr. Speaker, I think the member cost is way off base on this one. I think we're making good progress.
Charlottetown Belvedere.
Sometimes I think, Mr. Speaker, that we speak about one thing on the House and then we have a completely different channel on the other side of the House. But that's okay, because we will continue to speak to Islanders and we'll continue to speak up for them. That's what we do over here on this side of the House. This government has finally said that they agree that housing should be a human right. Reluctantly, but finally. The minister didn't include it, though, in the Residential Tenancy Act. So we gave him an amendment to build that into the new law. Question to the minister. If you actually support making housing a human right, will you commit now to include that principle in the new tenancy bill?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, when you look at the documentation from the United Nations, for example, and about housing as a human right, it's something that I do believe in. It's something we discuss with staff. And Mr. Speaker, when we work with the Legislative Council Office and I work with my legislation specialists, we talk about the best way to build legislation that's going to serve Islanders. And Mr. Speaker, this amendment is one we'll consider, but typically the way we write our legislation is not to include those sort of clauses. I mean, it's something that we'll continue to consider, Mr. Speaker. It's something that's a change in the mentality, I think, of how we actually draft legislation, but we're going to continue to work with it. Thank you.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
This week, the management of an extremely important resource for homeless Islanders, the Community Outreach Center, was taken over by the Adventure Group through a contract brokered by the province. The previous provider, the Salvation Army, managed this cost at $386,000 per year. I asked the minister in this House if we could expect the cost to double. Media reported last night that it has ballooned to $1.5 million, almost 4 times as much. Question to the Minister of Housing. What services will the Adventure Group provide to help clients find stable housing?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm really proud to stand in this House and say that we are putting this investment into helping our homeless around the island. I mean, Mr. Speaker, this started off as a pilot project under the previous minister, and this, due to the diligent efforts of the department and the working group, we've continued to grow, we've continued to expand. We're expanding services. I think the member probably heard Roxanne Carter-Thompson on Compass last night talking about some of the great initiatives that the Adventure Group has planned. For example, social enterprise was one of the big things she talked about, and that's something the member from Charlottetown Victoria Park has talked a lot about as well. So we're listening to the community, we're assessing the needs of our clients, and we're making progress, Mr. Speaker, and we're putting the investment in there to make that happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
What I'm getting at is what's the difference between the contracts? They look very similar. You ran a pilot project with no data and no direction. You didn't know what you were doing. You don't even know what you're doing now. I'll remind you that the Salvation Army contract was scheduled to provide regular scheduled programming, dedicated case management, collaborative support of other organization and case management, act as a single point of entry, showers, laundry, computer services, 7 days a week. Question to the minister. And you know what? This is about stability and finding help for clients and stopping the pattern of homelessness. Question to the minister. What extra services is the Adventure Group providing beyond the services the Salvation Army contract you boasted about? How can you justify this going from over $4,000 a day from the $1,100 a day it was before?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't know if the member across doesn't want us to make progress or where he's going with this. I mean, one of the things, frankly, it's a little bit insulting, I think, to the working group that manages the service, has been working so hard over the years to expand. And we're talking about 15 partners across the non-profit, everyone from the CMHA to Peers Alliance to, the Native Council, PEI. They are collecting data, they're taking suggestions, they're working on the front lines with the people that need the help the most. I mentioned social enterprise, dedicated case management is one thing. We're going to be renovating the community outreach center, not just for accessibility, but with the laundry facilities, the showers, all the things that the member talked about, and this money's needed in order to make that happen. And the Venture Group, I'm looking forward to see what they do. Thank you very much.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
This is too important, Minister. You have been disjointed and you've been dysfunctional with how you've supported those groups and organizations. The minister said housing is a continuum, and it is. Recently found out that the minister will not even have data on the number of homeless islanders until 2023, leaving only 2 years until homelessness is legislated to be eliminated in this province. Strategic planning and investments, strategic planning is important and needs to be done. Question to the minister. You mentioned you were going to undertake an internal review. Minister, that's not good enough. I'm asking you again, as I asked the Premier,
Question?
Will you launch an independent external review of all programs and services and policies from your department focusing on homeless supports for each and every islander?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
So, Mr. Speaker, under this administration and the leadership of the Premier, we have forged forward where nothing existed before. Before this administration was here, there was barely a warming shelter. And today, we have the Adventure Group that's partnering with the CMHA, Upper Room Ministries, Resource Abilities, to provide wraparound services to help our homeless. We're collecting data. We're part of the federal programs that's going to make sure we collect it across all organizations. And we're forging ahead. We're making progress. We're really working with the clients at the focus, trying to end the cycle of homelessness that some of them face. And Mr. Speaker, I'm really looking forward to see the progress that's going to be made on this file. Thank you.
Larry Inverness.
Hope our American guests are feeling a little more at home today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with an all-time high of 23,000 Islanders on the patient registry, nurse practitioner vacancies, and a shortage of family physicians who support nurse practitioners, primary health care under this government is in a shambles. If we can't recruit and retain physicians and nurses faster than we lose them, we need to do something. We need to expand scopes of practice and explore new allied health professionals to support our current complement of physicians and nurses. Plus, PEI does have the new Health Professions Act to follow, Mr. Speaker. Question to the Minister of Health. Why are we not seeing prompter action on implementing a service like midwifery and like many other small health professions that would support and ease burdens of our professionals in our healthcare system?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. There has been and will be action. The honourable member references midwifery. We had a brief discussion that in budget estimates yesterday, Mr. Speaker. You look at some of the initiatives that we have taken with regard to recruitment. For example, Mr. Speaker, over the last 1 year period, recruitment of 40 physicians, and I know that there have been ones that have left as well, but 40 physicians, a net of 19, I'll be right up front, compared to a 2-year period a number of years ago, and I think the honourable member knows what period I'm speaking about, when there was a net recruitment over 2 years of 5.
Larry Inverness.
Minister, the reality is that we're still seeing Islanders without services, Mr. Speaker, here. 20 of the current nursing vacancies are within mental health and addictions. Registered psychiatric nurses are recognized in many central and western provinces. In a CBC article in August 2021, the College of Registered Nurses said if government asked them to look into including RPNs in their college, they would. The Department of Health and Wellness has also stated they are exploring utilizing RPNs for mental health positions. Question to the Minister. 20 vacancies could have been filled today with registered psychiatric nurses. When and will the province be allowing RPNs to practice in PEI?
The Honourable Minister of Health Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for the question. It's a great question. It's something that even before that I was in the position as Minister of Health and Wellness that I had been reached out to the department in conjunction with Health PEI and in conjunction with the appropriate colleges, Mr. Speaker, are moving forward on this. Certainly, again, though, I do thank the honourable member for bringing it forward. Very valid suggestion, very valid point. Thank you.
Larry Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, slugs moves faster than these government, Mr. Speaker. They're just too slow. Physician assistants are trained medical professions that can perform physical examinations, prescribe medication, order diagnostic imaging, and perform other procedures within the scope of supervising physician. They could be utilized to support our family physicians and increase the number of patients seen each day and taken on the practice, as well as expand walk-in services. Question: when and will you instruct your department to explore adding physician assistants to your complement of PEI health professionals?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Mr. Speaker, a great question from the honourable member. He references that we're moving forward as a slug. Previously, I think that the movement actually was backwards. At least we are making progress, Mr. Speaker. We are making progress. But again, excellent comment that the honourable member does bring forward. And yes, we are looking at what we can do with regard to expanding scopes of practice. We have seen that. We have looked at the Regulated Health Professions Act, what changes can be made there, Mr. Speaker. We have to make the best use of all of our resources, all of our human resources. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to go back to the inflation question and my questions to the Minister of Finance. It was announced this morning, it was mentioned that Canada's inflation rate from March rose to 6.7%, a full percentage point from February, already at a 30-year high. PEI remains as the province most affected and worse in the country at an 8.9% inflation rate. Question to the Minister of Finance: will there be any increase to the announced $100 and $150 contribution that islanders are patiently waiting for and needed weeks ago, given this new information? And when can we see this coming, since the announcement was made over 6 weeks ago?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Honourable Member, we're working with CRA to get that payment out as quickly as possible. The federal government maybe doesn't move quite as quickly as we would like them to, but we are working together to ensure that islanders do receive that payment. As far as whether we'll increase that, not at this time, but we'll continue to be there for islanders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Well, I won't say you move slowly, as my honourable member behind me said, but I will say you seem to put the cart before the horse when making your announcements. Mr. Speaker, there are many things that the government cannot control when it comes to inflation, as supply and demand takes a big portion of the issue with goods and services. But what government can control is its spending, because deficits can affect inflation. Question to the Minister of Finance: after being handed over a $75 million surplus when you came into power, being given 98 cents on every dollar for COVID spending, will you acknowledge that your $92.9 million projected deficit plays a significant role in our island inflation issue?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Honourable Member, we can't have it both ways. We hear on a daily basis the needs from the opposition and what they would like to see come forward. But we want to be there for islanders. We have, through the department, we've looked at this. We know we can handle it fiscally. We want to make sure that with the bond raters we have the rate that we want to borrow the money that we need at a good percentage point. And we have been there, and I want to thank the former government for leaving us in the position they were at. No one knew at that time we'd go into COVID and all the challenges that we have had in this mandate, but we'll continue to be there for islanders. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The unaffordability issue in this province is getting out of control. I hate to repeat myself, as there are numerous other questions I want to ask your government, but again, I still cannot get answers on these questions that are of utmost importance to many islanders. Question to the Minister of Finance: what is your government's plan to rectify your role in the island's inflation issue?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
That's right. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Honourable Member. We are working to be there for Islanders. We've frozen the fees, a number of fees that Islanders would pay. We'll continue to look at what we can do. We have no control over the inflation of the country. We hear from the Bank of Canada that the rate will increase 5, 6, 7, 8 times this year. We're not sure. But, I've said before, we know that there are going to be some real tough economic times ahead, and we want to be there for Islanders as much as we can. But we cannot be there. We cannot make everyone whole, that's for sure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Cornwall Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our nonprofit and NGO sector is an important part of our island community. These groups perform invaluable work in many fields and contribute to our province in countless ways. The last 2 years have been difficult for this sector as they have for many others. Question to the Minister of Finance. How is this government working with this sector to help support them to navigate the current challenges that they face?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Honourable Member. We're working with NGOs through the Department of Social Development and Housing. We have provided year-over-year funding for a number of NGOs, and we'll continue to do what we can. Thank you.
Cornwall Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my past life, I was involved with nonprofits, and I know that I lobbied myself personally for multi-year agreements. The advantage of multi-year funding agreements is it gives greater certainty to the organization and allows them to plan their work and projects more effectively. Question to the Minister of Finance. Have the number of nonprofits and NGOs that receive multi-year funding agreements increased over the past 2 years? And secondly, how would a nonprofit go about requesting a multi-year agreement?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Honourable Member. I believe the number of year-to-year funding for core funding for NGOs is around, I think, 20, but I, again, would have to defer to my 23, thank you. I knew the opposition would know that. Thank you very much. 23, and we will continue to work. We continue to increase the funding as much as we can, and we'll continue to do that. And if anyone is interested in applying for that year-to-year funding, I would say to reach out to myself or to the Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Cornwall Meadowbanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Another area where the government can support this sector is with HST rebates. I was just pleased to see in the new budget that the government has committed to increasing the HST rebate for charities and NGOs to 50%. Question to the Minister of Finance. When will Island NGOs and charities be able to benefit from this change?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker and Honourable Member. I hope that every one of my caucus come to me and ask this question on whatever department they want to when the budget is passed. Thank you very much.
Charlottetown, Brighton. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The continued delay in tabling the RTA is terrifying for tenants, some who are facing 30% or higher rent increases allowed under the old Act. If the Minister of Housing and Social Development cannot table the Act now, he should at least be doing something for Islanders in the interim. Question to the Minister. Will you commit to work towards an immediate moratorium on rent increases above 2%?
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member across does raise a very good point. It was the same point raised by the member from Summerside, Wilmot, recently. And when it comes to greater than allowable rent increases, this is an area that needs to be transparent. We need to make sure that it has proper consideration there. And I believe we do need to look at doing something in the interim, in the short term, before we get the Residential Tenancy Act legislation in place. And that's what I said to the member from Summerside Wilmot as well. And I want to work with you to find out what that level is. 2%, I'm not sure that's the right amount, but let's find something together.
Don Valley Sherbrooke.
PEI Law Society and the Land Matters Advisory Committee both acknowledge that the special planning areas outlined in the current Planning Act can be problematic for landowners and require updating. I am hearing from individuals in my district who are having a difficult time making decisions about their land because they simply don't know when the rules around the special planning areas might change or if they will be changing in the foreseeable future. Question to the Minister of Agriculture and Land. What should I tell them?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and that is a great question. The special planning areas around the province have been in place for over 25 years, I believe, Mr. Speaker, and they need it needs to be renewed or modernized a little bit, so we are making regulation changes. There's some coming out very soon, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be happy to update the House when they're proclaimed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown Belvedere, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The annual operating grant for the capital area municipal public transit system is currently $180,000. This provincial funding for T3 has not changed since it was introduced in 2012, which makes it really difficult for the City of Charlottetown, the Town of Stratford and the Town of Cornwall to enhance or expand public transit services and keep fares attractive. In 2021, these municipalities requested that the annual grant be increased to $425,000, a request supported by the Federation of PEI Municipalities in its 2022 budget submission. Question for the Minister of Fisheries and Communities. If public transit is a priority for your government, why are you ignoring the funding shortfall for the capital area municipal public transit system?
The honourable Minister of Fisheries and Communities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department is working actually with the Department of Transportation, and also we're having a conversation with the Department of the Environment on how we can improve transit. This is also a conversation we're having with municipalities. We're presently in the process of engaging municipalities on what the next funding agreement is going to look like when it comes to transfer payments and also equalization, and we'll be looking at all of them things as we move forward. Thank you.
End of question period. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, April is Cancer Awareness Month, or as it has come to be known, April is Daffodil Month. It has become an annual tradition for Islanders to mark the arrival of spring by donating to the Canadian Cancer Society's Daffodil fundraising campaign. By purchasing flowers or by making a commitment to regular donations, many Islanders take the opportunity each April to make donations that support cancer research, that support people dealing with cancer, or contribute to cancer education in our country. Prince Edward Island's dedicated volunteers consistently work to make sure the Cancer Society's message gets out there. As a government, we recognize the work of the Cancer Society and we welcome their advocacy. Cancer is a disease that is all too common, and we must always seek to expand and effectively target our cancer services. Mr. Speaker, the arrival of the COVID pandemic has delayed renewal of our PEI cancer strategy, but efforts are underway to renew our cancer priorities and identify key actions for prevention and health promotion. Screening and early detection, coordination of cancer treatment, patient support, and follow-up or palliative care. Physicians, staff, patient advisors, and leaders have actioned a number of recommendations in the previous provincial cancer strategy that include setting targets for the diagnosis pathway of lung and breast cancers, conducting a feasibility study for lung cancer screening in PEI, expanding training in the palliative approach to care, investing more in oncology treatment, and expanding the delivery of the PEI smoking cessation program to provide more resources in helping people quit. In 2019, the Canadian Partnership Against Cancer released a renewed national strategy that sets the direction for the next 10 years. The 2019 to 2029 Canadian Strategy for Cancer Control identifies 5 priority areas focusing on reducing the risk of cancer, improving access to diagnostic services and treatments, better supporting those with cancer experience, and building a sustainable cancer system. The strategy also includes 3 additional priorities with recommendations that were identified and are being led by First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The development of a new provincial plan will work to align with national priorities while moving forward to address our local priorities here in PEI. As Minister, and in conjunction with our government, we would like to acknowledge and thank the Provincial Cancer Coordination Steering Committee for its work and we do look forward to development of the new provincial plan in 2022. And once again, Mr. Speaker, I do want to acknowledge and thank the Canadian Cancer Society for all the work that they do, and especially during the month of April, Daffodil Month. Thank you.
The honourable member from Mermaid, Stratford, and the opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honour to rise to speak to this minister's statement, and I appreciate the minister for bringing this forward. There's not a family across this province, or probably across Canada and North America and the world, that hasn't been touched by cancer. And the Cancer Society has done phenomenal work over so many years. Gosh, I remember my mom going door to door during the month, doing the campaign for them and knocking on doors and visiting with all of her neighbors, as she was the person in our community that would go out and do that. And they've evolved so much over the years, and so has the work that's been done in order to promote wellness and screening and early detection for cancer, because we know that that is the best way for us to fight cancer, is to detect it early. And you know, we had a conversation about this yesterday in the budget estimates around, you know, what we're doing in order to address our screening numbers and those early detection numbers. And you know, we are lower than some of the national average, and so we do have a lot of work to do. And COVID's impacted that, because, you know, one of the things that the Canadian Cancer Survival Network is concerned about is how many people didn't go through that early detection, didn't go through the screening during the COVID time. And so it's really important now that all islanders do take the opportunity to do that early screening, go for early detection. And I can't speak highly enough of the Cancer Society and the services that they provide islanders. I can't speak highly enough about the people, frontline staff that work at the Cancer Treatment Centre with cancer patients every day and their families, and the supports that they give. And as we all know, I've been touched recently. And the work that people do working within this area and the support that they provide families is just second to none, and it just takes really incredible people to support that much. So please, anybody listening, please go out and do early detection. Take the opportunity to do the screening. Now is the most important time to do it. And again, thank you for bringing this forward, and thank you to the Cancer Society for the Daffodil campaign and making sure that people are aware and get the treatment that they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from O'Leary, Inverness, and a third-party whip.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I want to commend the minister to him. And cancer is an illness and a disease that affects just about every islander. I'm no different in that regard. Both my mom and dad were diagnosed with cancer. My mom was successful, dad not so much, but in the end, and actually I have a good friend that's just commencing the journey to the services that we provide here. I certainly commend the Cancer Society. I know during my time as the minister, they were always a group that was advocating in a professional way. They were always looking out for islanders and making sure that governments were aware and providing us options on things that we can do. And the Daffodil campaign is a good recognition of a time to do that during the month of April. I guess one of the things that I sort of felt that during my time as minister that I have some pride in was that I was the minister that commenced the linear accelerator at the QEH, Mr. Speaker, and that modernized the outcomes and the techniques, and also was less evasive, and it could pinpoint its identification of cancer and treatment. So those are some things that certainly have paid dividends over the years. I know those pieces of equipment that we deal with when it comes to cancer are extremely expensive, and I certainly commend any government that in its allocating of resources towards that, because I think, as we all know, that foundations in the hospitals are the ones responsible for equipment fundraising, but when you get into items that are in the millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars, that's where government has to step up and try to provide that. And that's always a challenge for a small jurisdiction of 160,000 people to get that kind of technology in place. And I was proud to say that during my time we were able to do that. So with that, thanks, Minister.
End of minister statements. Presenting and receiving petitions. Tabling of documents. The honourable member from Mermaid Stratford and the opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, by leave of the House, I beg leave to table a letter from BIPOC Usher outlining their concerns regarding lack of consultation on the amendments to the Mental Health Act, calling for consultation from individuals with lived experience, clinical psychologists, and members of various marginalized communities. And I move, seconded by Charlottetown Victoria Park, that the said document be now received and do lie on the table.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Any more tabling of documents? No. Reports by committees. The honourable member from Summerside, Wilmot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Standing Committee on Rules, Regulations, Private Bills and Privileges, and following the receipt of report on recognition of guests on yesterday, I move, seconded by the honourable member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, that the report of the committee be adopted. As a result of its deliberations, your committee is pleased to make the following recommendations to the members of the Legislative Assembly. Your committee recommends that Rule 23 be deleted and replaced with the following. Matters of privilege and recognition of guests. 23.1. A member may be recognized under provision of Rule 22.1c to recognize guests or offer a brief statement on other relevant matters at the discretion of the Speaker. 2. Leaders of recognized political parties in the House or their designate for the day may make a recognition with no time limit. And 3, all other members make a recognition shall speak for not more than 45 seconds. The second recommendation requires, it's just about combining Rules 23 and 24, statement by members and statements by ministers to one rule so that the whole rule book doesn't have to be reordered. It doesn't change anything about that section. Your committee advises, following the adoption of the report, these rule changes will be effective immediately, and arrangements will be made to update and reprint the rules of the Legislative Assembly for distribution to all members. In the short term, an updated version of the rule book will be posted on the Assembly's website. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak to the report? The honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton.
I would actually, and I'm standing up because I understand that comments in the back room as well as my pushing the limits led to this change, and I fully support the change. I think the committee is doing wonderful work, and now I'm standing up. I can't help mentioning there's rich territory for doing more changes. Lots of members in other parts of the legislature is speaking way too long, in my opinion, and so I urge the committee to continue the good work and make more changes. Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to speak to the report? No? Shall it carry? Speaker needs a new stopwatch. Introduction of government bills. Motions other than government. Orders of the day other than government. The honourable member from Mermaid, Stratford, and the opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I call motion 74.
Shall it carry?
Mr. Speaker, motion 74, moving towards Land Protection Act style regulation of housing, is under debate, and debate was adjourned by the Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
The Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I rise to speak to this motion again, I want to start off by saying again that while I repeat, cannot support this motion, I do support the need for additional housing supports across the housing continuum to ensure every islander has a place to call home, and really also help islanders achieve home ownership. So like most provinces, Mr. Speaker, we are looking for innovative ways to increase the supply of housing across the continuum. And Mr. Speaker, there are several initiatives that the department is working on that I am very eager to announce that will help address some of the concerns related to, for example, attainable housing and support from municipalities in creating additional affordable housing. And Mr. Speaker, of course, it's really important that we all work together across multiple departments, my colleagues, fellow ministers and their departments, and that can be the Minister of Fisheries and Communities as we work with municipalities, It can be Minister of Finance as we look at potential tax changes that may be needed, Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, as we help improve the regulations that allow for building. It can be the Minister of Land. Again, when we look at the rules that are involved for where buildings are allowed and what types are allowed. And of course, the Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, who already has several programs within his department that help with this. So we're going to work together, Mr. Speaker, but just to reiterate, I cannot support this motion as a whole because several of the clauses are arbitrary in nature, without factual basis or data to support them, and the assumptions that they make. And I want to specifically urge all my colleagues here in the Legislative Assembly to defeat this motion. Thank you very much.
The honourable member from Morel, Dona, and the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a while since you've been back. I forgot it was on the list.
Yeah.
Just quickly, interesting motion on housing speculation. Comparing it to the Lands Protection Act and the Water Act in PEI is interesting, Mr. Speaker. We do have limited land. We do have limited water. You know, we've got a certain number of acres and we've got a certain number of aquifers as well. But do we have limited housing potential in the province? It's an interesting question, Mr. Speaker. One could argue we have lots potential for new housing in the province. You know, it isn't limited to a defined area or an amount for that matter in PEI for the most part right now. You know, I've heard this Premier speak many times about trying to work with communities to get out of the way, or how can the province encourage communities to open up pieces of land so that we can have more housing, more units in PEI, Mr. Speaker. However, you know, after giving it some more thought on, you know, is housing actually limited in PEI or not, you know, you could say we're limited or defined by what we can build or expand as compared to the population base or the need for it, Mr. Speaker. In other words, if our capacity to build additional housing far outweighed our need for housing, there wouldn't be limits, Mr. Speaker. So in a way, I can kind of see the argument saying that housing is limited in PEI currently, given our capacity, say, in the building industry. Limiting the number of, say, apartment units or buildings may be problematic right now. You know, we need access to them. We need people building these places. You know, another point I wonder about is limiting ownership of new construction or the buying up of current homes. You know, you could argue for sure that limiting REITs or corporations from buying up homes could help suppress the spiking costs of home ownership here in PEI. But also we have to be careful about limiting these types of groups from building does not increase the supply of homes and thus helps drive up prices as well, Mr. Speaker. So I think that has to be a consideration. I'm sure many would find the initial thought of limiting who could buy what and how much, some people would find that off-putting. However, you know, I think we do need to square that long-standing, you know, law of land ownership in PEI historically, you know, the worried nature of outside influencing, dominating our island lots, so to speak, Mr. Speaker. So I can see that point. But you know, back to the question about is housing limited right now? Do we have restrictions that are inhibiting our ability to keep up with the population or the demand? And certainly all the other factors that come with the spiking population, you know, healthcare and public infrastructure and land use, Mr. Speaker. They're good questions. So the crux of this motion is to create a commission. I don't personally support the idea of doing that, but I think there's other questions that, you know, that have merit on this. There's other ways the department could be looking into this, and they should be looking at into it. You know, you could also bring it to a standing committee if you want to, Mr. Speaker. But I think what we absolutely do need, and then there was some good questions about this, is finding the better data. I think it was almost 1,400 housing units in 2021 that were completed, Mr. Speaker. Given this growth, what data are we collecting to measure that growth and the changes in the housing market? You know, it's true in some jurisdictions, corporate ownership of residential housing is a growing challenge, and it's a good question. Is it a problem here in PEI yet? Do we know that? Do we know how many homes are corporately owned? Is it actually a problem here? Are we talking a dozen homes? Are we talking hundreds? Or what's the potential for ownership, Mr. Speaker? What is our projection for need in PEI? How can we start tracking this and contrasting it with things like our immigration targets, like inflation, like the rising interest rates? So an interesting motion for sure, and I just want to say a few words and thank you for your time, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prince Edward Island is a beautiful place to live, work, and play. Islanders know this, and never has it been more obvious to the rest of the world than it has been in the last couple of years, when we seem to have had a spotlight shone on us. Our island is not a huge area of land. It is finite. As a result, we have recognized the importance of protecting various aspects of it, such as our land and our water. We understand that these are two precious things that need to be protected by legislation. We see the value in our land and water, so government stepped up to protect it because it is in the best interest of islanders. Food and water are two of the most basic things on which we as living beings depend. So is shelter, and that is the point. We are limited in housing. Developers wanting to build is entirely different than buying existing stock. Land ownership is regulated to ensure local ownership and control of our agricultural production. Water is regulated to ensure it is protected and used in a way that is consistent with the public interest. Shelter, the last basic human need, does not benefit from a legislation that similarly ensures it is used productively and in alignment with public interest. Speculation in the market leads to more and more people wanting to get into the game, to purchase properties on the island, in it to make some money. This is in direct competition with first-time home buyers who have just entered the market looking for their first home, seniors looking to downsize, or those seeking affordable shelter. Not only is there no stock available, the prices are so, and I had a conversation with constituents last night who are looking at potential moves, and they said whether we like it or not, we can't move. We don't know where we would go. So indeed, our housing stock is, I would argue, worse than limited. The prices, but not only is there no stock available, the prices are so high and will just continue to move in this direction if there are no interventions. As this continues, is government's plan just to give out more rental vouchers and rental supplements? How much are we willing to invest here before government recognizes that we indeed have a capacity issue and that they actually have some responsibility here that goes beyond paying landlords to let people simply stay in their homes? That in itself is artificially inflating rental costs as it is. If we were doing this correctly, we would recognize that for some time we will need to look at continuing to invest in rental supplements and subsidies while we build actual capacity. Mr. Speaker, Stats Canada shows a significant increase in investor-owned properties in Atlantic Canada, which is defined as non-owner occupied properties since 2020. These properties are further defined as vacant, rented out to others, or used as a secondary property. Cottages and cabins are not included in this. In fact, some Canadian cities, and the data that they had available for this was only for Ontario, BC, and the Atlantic provinces, have seen up to 90% of recently completed homes go to investors. 90%. So we can't say it's not a problem or that it's going to be a problem. That is much higher than normal. According to this report, about 1 in 5, which is 21% of homes in the median city they used, and as I read through that, Halifax was basically on par with this median city, as was Moncton, not too far behind. Across the 4 regions, across the 4 regions, so 21% of homes are owned by investors. If you look at simply new construction builds, built after 2016, that number rises to 1 in 3 homes are bought by investors. This is a problem. Their ownership of new housing is overrepresented. It's running about 60% faster than the general market share. This does not bode well for islanders looking to purchase a new home or stay in their home. A good return on investment and lower housing costs as compared to the rest of the country is making us even more desirable and therefore vulnerable to out-of-province investors. It removes existable affordable housing from the market and keeps vacancy rates low. It drives up prices and leaves so many behind. Without any attempt at regulating this, how far will it go? What will it look like for our children's future? When I think of our children's future, not just in housing, but in so many areas, I get sad and I get angry and I feel this sense of urgency, and I don't know how everyone in this room can't be feeling that. We need to protect islanders by ensuring housing stock does not fall into the hands of a few, which is exactly what we are seeing across this country. I have stood in this House before and spoke about my fears for PEI. If we do not consider the impacts of all of this, what is protecting Prince Edward Island from becoming like a Martha's Vineyard type of place, where tourists come play on our island in the summertime, when they leave, but there's a problem, and then they leave, but there's a problem here. Islanders cannot afford to live here. So who is going to work for, serve, entertain these tourists? Mr. Speaker, our population is projected to grow exponentially in the next 10 years. It has been growing for years, and the lack of government planning and policy has gotten us into quite a mess in many different areas. At the very least, let's look at protecting housing from further lack of planning and policy. And I'm going to repeat that because I don't think everybody's listening. At the very least, let's look at protecting housing from further lack of planning and policy. It's our job. We must consider the ripple effects here, the economy. If people cannot afford to live in the communities in which they work, or to live at least close, what's the point? Our labor shortages, how will this help with recruitment and retention in any sector? If people do not have an affordable, appropriate place to live, safe place to live, they will never come here. And if they do, why would they ever stay? In this current market, there is no hope for so many, including our young people who are currently looking at trends here in housing, in domestic violence, in education, and the list goes on. There's no hope. So many islanders at this point, at this very moment, are left having to make decisions between food, rent, medications, heat. People are struggling. We know that. And then there are also those wanting to lower their carbon footprint by lessening reliance on vehicles, being close to transit. This style of legislation just makes sense when we tie all of these various aspects together. While this government is not solely responsible for this housing crisis, they are certainly challenged to even attempt to get it under control. How many times have we heard members of this conservative government stand and say, we need to start thinking outside the box. We need innovative ideas. That is exactly what this motion is asking government to do. This motion is asking for an independent commission to study this issue and report back to the House. Why is that so intimidating to government? I'm not sure. We are urging you, please, think outside the box. As you claim you want to so desperately, here is your opportunity. As you acknowledge shelter as a third basic need of islanders that is in desperate need of legislative protection. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was driving in my car the other day, Mr. Speaker, and on the radio they were talking about the housing crisis going on right across the country. And one of the experts spoke, and he said something that just struck me to the core. Yeah, that's definitely the issue, is housing can't both be a commodity and a human right. They cannot exist together. And until we can decouple those two things, there is no way to solve this problem. So hearing some of the things that the Minister for Social Development and Housing said about recognizing and enshrining housing as a human right in our legislation, I'm distraught at the future, as the honourable member before me just mentioned, when I think of my children, I recently went to the housing market. I did a member statement here, and there's 2 good salaries coming into my home, and there's no way I could make the move. I could not purchase the home I have today if I was to try that. And when I think of my children, I don't see how it's going to be possible for the next generations that are coming. And we have an opportunity here to take some action, to decouple that, to be the leader, to show people how it's done. And we're doing nothing. So, Mr. Speaker, this motion is just calling on government to create a commission that can examine these things and determine that, indeed, we can't be treating housing as an investment, housing as a commodity. It's not something to be played around with and money to be made upon. It's something that we all need as a human right. So we really have to recognize this, and until we can do that, we're just not going to get anywhere, Mr. Speaker. So I fully support this motion because it's in that spirit that it's brought forward, and that commission could bring forward experts to show us that this needs to be done. I mean, PEI, we got to the point that farmers couldn't afford to live and work on the land that they were on, and we basically had a revolution here. So unless that's what government is really pushing us towards, is the people to stand up and revolt in the streets, you better get some action going, government. So, that being said, I fully support this motion, Mr. Speaker, and I hope that the government members on the other side can see fit to not doom our future generations to poverty. Thank you.
Honourable members, I exhausted my list. Is there anyone, the honourable member from Charlottetown, Brighton?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm really honoured to speak to this motion presented by our honourable leader of the opposition. It would appear that the government members have not only misunderstood what this motion is about, but have indeed deliberately misunderstood the basic intent. To set the record straight, let me restate the basic intent of this motion, and excuse me if I get it wrong too. What this motion does is to suggest that our unique Land Protection Act, or LPA, designed to protect and control our farmland, could also be used to control undesirable aspects of housing, and that we should establish a commission to investigate what controls might be considered. We have, in fact, here on PEI, unique powers to control real estate, powers that do not exist elsewhere in Canada. If my memory serves me correctly, it was Joe Gist, the late Premier of PEI, who cemented into the Canadian Constitution the unique rights of the PEI government to control the ownership of our lands. Now, this has been understood so far to mean control of our farmland as expressed in our LPA, but in fact, the fact is that all housing sits on land, so housing could also be controlled if we as a legislature wanted to do so. The suggested method is to establish a commission and let the commission investigate the possible options. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition suggests a number of possible subjects to investigate, such as REITs, but ultimately the subjects of investigation and recommendations are completely up to the Commission. Now, I know little about the ins and outs of REITs or the special tax considerations that they're allowed by CIA, but if they can be controlled in a way that offer better tax revenues for PEI, I should think that everyone in this House would be interested. In my own district, I hear that there are some individuals who own as many as 30 houses, which are badly managed, in the opinion of the neighbours. The obvious question is if individuals should be allowed to own that many houses. I'm not saying yes or no, but surely it's a question worth examining through a commission. To me, such an issue would be perfectly parallel to a farmer being limited to owning 1,000 acres of land. The existence of the LPA has protected our farmlands. It can still be improved. Personally, for instance, I don't see why any farmland should be owned by non-farmers, but that's just me. Horace Carver stated in this House that if we MLAs don't like the results of the LPA, it's completely up to us to change the LPA so we get the desired results. For the Minister of Agriculture to throw up his hands and declare he's frustrated is a complete cop-out. He and the rest of the House, all of us, already have the power to change the LPA so we get the desired results. This motion does not suggest any action except to establish a commission to look at the possible ways we can use our unique powers on PEI to control our housing outcome. There's nothing to fear, only the hope that the new options will emerge, which can then be considered and debated by this House. I fully support this motion and urge it be adopted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anyone else that would like to be added to the list? No? If not, I'll go back to the mover of to close debate, the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's been a really interesting conversation, and that's what this House is all about. And so I've appreciated the range of opinions that have come forward. I appreciated the comments that were made today. Many of them clearly impassioned, all informed, and from some extremely valid points of view. And I think, as with all complex issues, and housing is, if nothing else, extraordinarily complex, it's important that we recognize and admit that whatever position we have on this issue, and it's a multifaceted issue, but the position we have is based on what we know at this time in this place, and that we must always be open to arguments coming from elsewhere, to question our own beliefs, but also to come at this with a set of values, a set of principles that inform what we're trying to achieve. And this motion, for me, reflects the values and the principles of the party I represent, a party which is, at its heart, about ensuring the well-being of islanders, whether that be socially, economically, or in terms of protecting an environment that it will ensure that future generations of islanders are able to meet their needs as we are today. The LPA upon which this motion is based is, of course, a regulation of ownership. I'd like us all to imagine for a moment if the Lands Protection Act did not exist here on Prince Edward Island. What do you think ownership of our land would look like?
That's sobering.
If you stop for a moment and consider that, I suspect we would almost go full circle back to the early 1800s and before, when land ownership was held in an enormous concentration in a few hands, because that's the way that unfettered, unregulated capitalism works. The member from Moraldona made some very valid points, and I listened very carefully, but as I always do to his comments, I appreciate the thoughtfulness that goes into all the contributions that he makes to debates in this House. That yes, we can't draw an exact parallel between land and housing, or water and housing, I think was the other example you used. And we're not looking here for an exact parallel. However, we are looking for a principle which supports the idea that if we accept that housing is a human right, that shelter is an absolute human necessity, and if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very bottom, those principal requirements for us to have any sort of other goals in life are things like food, water, and shelter, and clothing. There are a couple of others, but those are the foundational needs that we all have. So if we accept that having shelter over your head is a foundational need for all of the citizens of this province, then I would argue that it's incumbent on a government to do what it can to provide that shelter for all islanders. And what this motion does is it suggests that there are things government could do. We have a choice here. We can choose regulation of the marketplace, and the level to which we regulate the marketplace is not prescribed in this motion.
Correct.
What we ask for is the establishment of a commission to look at possible solutions that we could employ here on Prince Edward Island. And we are not alone in experiencing a housing crisis. However, we are perhaps more than any other jurisdiction in Canada. And if you look at Canada and compare our country to the other G7 nations, we are off the chart, literally off the charts, in terms of the ratio between housing affordability and income. Exactly. I wish I had the chart in front. I know I couldn't use it, Speaker, if I had it in front of me. But if you look at a chart, and the baseline, I believe, goes back to 2005, at the G7 countries, and you look at that ratio of housing prices to wages, you will see that Canada is an outlier by an extreme margin. In some countries, our neighbor to the south, US, housing has actually become more affordable in terms of a ratio between income and prices since 2005. In most other G7 countries, it has increased to varying degrees, but Canada is off the charts. And of course, Prince Edward Island, as we know, within Canada, is a leader when it comes to inflation. Our rent costs have increased over 16% in the last 2 years, compared to very modest increases in most other jurisdictions. So we're looking at a unique problem here on Prince Edward Island, a problem of a runaway growth economy in a small jurisdiction. And of course, we always, be careful what I say here, we imagine that growth is good. And there are many good things that come with a growing economy. Of course there are. But there are downsides to that. And I think we have to ask ourselves when we see growth, particularly the strength of growth that we have experienced in Prince Edward Island over the last little while. Growth for whom? Growth of what? Because if we're growing sectors of the economy which are unsustainable or are drawing down resources, then that could be a problem. Growth at what costs? There are many ways of measuring the health of an economy beyond growth. We have vital signs here, which is, I'm really pleased that we instituted that. I'm really pleased that government came forward with long-term funding for several years of support for vital signs, something which really measures the well-being of the citizens of this province. And part of vital signs, of course, is access to housing. There are many, many, many other aspects of it. But the distinction between something like a well-being index or vital signs as we have here, and there are many others around the world, the distinction is that they do not just look at growth in the economy and say, great, growth is at 4% or 3% or 7% or whatever it is, and assume that things are good, because growth is not always good for everyone. And we need to be really careful. So we have a choice. Are we going to allow the marketplace here on Prince Edward Island to be unregulated and unfettered? I'm talking about the housing market specifically here. Because that seems to be the choice of this administration. And if that is the case, what are the consequences going to be? Well, I think we only need to look backwards at the last few years to see what the consequences of an unregulated housing market are. And it's not pretty. As my colleague said in her remarks from Charlottetown, Victoria Park, when I think of my children and the opportunities that they have to afford to have a house and a roof over their head, it doesn't look good. And while we cannot control, of course, the global economic situation, we can do what we are able to do on Prince Edward Island to create some guardrails, some parameters as to what we will allow to happen. We could do that. This government so far seems unwilling, uninterested to even consider that. We are asking for a commission to be set up to look at what possibilities we could have here should we choose to regulate the housing market. And that could be everything from a vacancy tax, which is being instituted in many places. It could be an increase to the deposit amount required for second and third and fourth and fifth dwellings. It could be regulation in terms of capping ownership. It could be bringing in new tax laws to dissuade and discourage and make it difficult for non-islanders to reap the profits of the housing boom here on Prince Edward Island and take them out of our economy. There are all kinds of things which we could do. And again, it's really important that this House realize that this motion is not saying we need to do this. We are going to make this illegal. We're going to make sure that we're going to do A, B, C, D, E, or F. That's not what this motion is. This motion is saying if we want to make a choice, if we look at the last few years and we don't like what we see in terms of the housing possibilities for our friends and neighbours and our children, then we have an opportunity to do that. And let's establish a commission to look into what's possible, and let's do something to ensure that the future of housing for our friends and neighbours and our children and future generations of islanders is stable. I really hope, despite the comments that I've heard from a couple of members on the government side, that you will consider and read carefully the operative clauses of this motion. Because that's where, in all motions, that's where the meat of the thing lies. I think we need to look for made in PEI solutions for our unique situation here. And I'm not going to go back and repeat the points I made in my opening remarks, but we are in a unique situation, which is why I think the reference to the LPA is useful in framing the concerns that we have here. Let's look for made in PEI solutions which are appropriate for our unique circumstances here. Let's be imaginative, let's be bold, and let's do what we can to ensure that islanders today and into the future have access to that basic human right, which is a roof over their heads. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member, are you calling for the question? Sirs, your arms, you may ring the bell. Please.
The opposition is ready for the vote.
Honourable members, all those voting against the motion, please stand.
The member from Cornwall Meadowbank, the Honourable Minister of Fisheries Communities, the Honourable Member from Morell-Donagh, the Honourable Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier, the Honourable Premier, Honourable Minister of Environment, Energy and Climate Action, the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown-Winslow, the Honourable Member from Montague-Kilmuir, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Land and the Minister for Justice and Public Safety, the Honourable Minister of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, the Honourable Minister of Social Development and Housing, the Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown West Royalty, the Honourable Leader of the Third Party, the Honourable the Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness.
Honourable members, all those voting for the motion, please stand.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, the Honourable Member from Summerside-Wilmot, the Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Victoria Park, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Belvedere, the Honourable Member from Charlottetown Brighton, the Honourable Member from Tyne Valley Sherbrooke, and the Honourable Member from Summerside South Drive.
Honourable Member, your motion was defeated. The Honourable Member from Mermaid Stratford and the Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I call motion 84.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Mr. Speaker, motion 84 is currently under debate. This was calling on government to improve retention by funding education opportunities for nursing staff. Debate was adjourned by the Minister of Health and Wellness.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness to continue debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is a pleasure to rise and continue debate on this very important motion, Mr. Speaker. You know, and when I look through the motion and whereases of it, for example, whereas nursing staff, RCWs, LPNs, and RNs are the foundation of our healthcare system and PEI, I'm sure that there's not one person in this legislature, probably not one person in Prince Edward Island, that would disagree with that. We look a little further down, Mr. Speaker, and whereas increasing staff numbers while also offering career progression options for our current nursing staff may significantly increase retention. Can't disagree with that at all, Mr. Speaker. Whereas immediately providing free education to islanders who want to enter the healthcare field as RCWs will increase our nursing support in the short term. And Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Health and Wellness and my colleagues here on this side of the House, and I do have to give thanks too as well to the opposition that they hit it in this motion here. The support that, feedback that we have received, that I have received from the third party in this as well. The fact that we have initiated free tuition for our CWs. Great move. And again, thanks to everyone in this legislature for promoting that. Mr. Speaker, as well, you look at government can then work with educational institutions to provide an accelerated program for current LPNs to upskill to RNs. We are doing that, Mr. Speaker. We are doing that. You look at some of the funding options that are available. I mentioned the free tuition for RCWs that was recently initiated. And through a great partnership with my colleague, the Minister of Economic Development, Tourism and Culture, that was able to make this happen through the Skills PEI program. You look at, as well, Mr. Speaker, with regard to LPNs, and again, through that partnership with Economic Development, Tourism and Culture, and through Skills PEI, to be able to provide assistance to those in the LPN program, Mr. Speaker. You look at the George Coles Bursary, you look at the Community Service Bursary, Mr. Speaker. These are just a couple of initiatives that help provide for that education, and I will be the first to admit, not just within healthcare, we have to be there as well for students in all disciplines, Mr. Speaker. You look at some of the incentives, a number of incentives that have been put in place by our government, and building upon the foundation that the previous administration did put in place. So, Mr. Speaker, I would have to say that when you look at the motion here, the content of it, there's a lot of it that we are already doing. I completely support the rationale, the reasoning behind this motion being put forward. Again, to the mover and seconder, thank you, and you will have my complete support on this motion. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from O'Leary Inverness and the third party whip.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And, I certainly wanted to have the opportunity to speak to this particular motion as a former Minister of Health and also as a critic and playing both sides of the equation. I tend to have a bit more of a broader perspective of the pros and cons of this. I certainly would say that, providing as many supports as we possibly can to not only recruit but as to retain our healthcare professionals, which we've got quite a broad variety of healthcare professionals, and obviously I had questions in the legislature to the minister too about emerging professions, how professions have become much more specific, like physician assistants and psychiatric nurses. And those are the types of things where the trend lines are heading, because once again we're dealing with very unique situations that our healthcare professionals provide them in. But I sort of look at the scenario many times, and I follow it rather closely, Mr. Speaker, as I try to do my job as best I can when it comes to criticizing government and making sure that issues are brought to the attention of the media and of government itself to heighten awareness and hopefully try to make sure that we're providing some solutions that will come forward. And I always try to bring that forward in any of my questions and any of my criticisms of government, to try to have some solutions, Mr. Speaker. But, the one thing that I've noticed a lot is that, from my time as a minister, when I would watch the numbers, and I would watch these numbers with worry. When I was there, I remember seeing nursing vacancies, when they were up in the 20 number, and I would fret about that. When it came to issues like LPNs, RCWs, that you would certainly see vacancies in those positions, but not to anywhere near to the degree that we're having today. And, you might see 1 or 2 or 3 positions, but, since this motion has been on the go for some time, I did jot some notes down. I just have here on February 23rd this year, there was 122 vacant nursing positions, and I believe 143 internal vacancies in nursing positions on PEI. And I might emphasize, that is with the Public Service Commission. That does not include in the private sector, where we have a number of our community and care facilities which may provide both community care as well as long-term care. So there's those vacancies that would be in the equation. Our federal government has vacancies by times. They've also been a recruiter of competition for us, Mr. Speaker. I think I had down here RCW vacancies. RCW vacancies, a 36-week course, Mr. Speaker, 36 weeks. 36 vacancies externally, 76 internal vacancies. 76. Once again, I reiterate, at my time, we might have 20 nursing vacancies and maybe 4 or 5 RCW vacancies. That's significant, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the minister has lost sleep over those numbers I thought it was bad at the numbers that I was dealing at. Mr. Speaker, though, one of the things that comes back to a challenge, and I know the minister made an announcement here not too awfully long ago about RCWs, that they were going to provide free tuition for RCWs. Now, I'd asked a few health professionals around, people involved with long-term care, will that make a difference? Well, the first question I'd asked them, said to them, is there any more new seats? No new seats. So if there's no new seats, and last year or the previous years that they were offering these courses, all those seats were filled, what did we gain? We gained nothing. And I might note that, I also asked a health professional to say, so what would be the type of person now that this will attract into the profession, even if there were seats available for them or new seats available? Well, the reality is that through Skills PEI today, if you're drawing unemployment insurance, you can get 3/4 of your 75% of your tuition paid for, plus there's some other supports that you would get beside that. So, that was to help attract people to, get into a more long-term workforce, to try to enhance their skills. And so when you encourage those type of people, and they're on EI, they've already got that, and it didn't seem to be an impediment for them to get into that. I'm sure it's an enhancement to have 100% of the tuition paid versus 75% of it paid. But anyway, having said that, we'll say that's a little bit of a positive. But what's it mostly going to attract? It would be people that aren't on EI. if you had free tuition, if you're not on EI and you're not going to get 75% of it paid, you could still apply to these particular courses. But really the people that are not on EI tend to be people that are probably fresh out of school, because you have to be out of school a year to try to be eligible for these skills PEI programs, Mr. Speaker. So then the question would be, so if you're a person just out of school, so we'll say you're 18, 19 years of age, are you mature enough and prepared enough and able to handle a job that is a challenging job? You know, you're dealing with seniors in most cases that, that may not be of their normal mind, I guess would be a better term to use. And, sometimes younger teenagers may not have that maturity level to handle that. I wonder whether they're the right people that you're trying to attract to the profession, to retain them and to continue on in that type of profession. I would argue that the things that we need to do to make a difference, number one is add more seats into the equation. I think you have to look at the realities that we're dealing with today in a province, is that transportation has now become a big factor. And I'll give marks to the government in trying to come up with this Toonie Transit and things of that nature. But that's going to be a challenge to accommodate Islanders from all parts of PEI to try to use that. I commend T3 Transit. They've put a schedule out for Western PEI. I'm wondering whether that's going to solve a lot of the problems for people that are going to take a particular course, like an RCW course, in, say, West Prince or Slemon Park. Because here's some of the factors that you run into. Number one, most people that are entering a profession like this, they're probably it could be a single mom or a person who has children. So you need to have childcare spaces, Mr. Speaker. I've got countless phone calls of constituents cannot find childcare. I send out a district email to my constituents every Sunday. First time I've ever put on that there was a lady that said, I'm willing to take children in my home. And I think she was filled in minutes. And there's still an outcry of people. So these are the types of issues we have to correct if we're going to see significant changes in recruiting people to a profession, providing them the training, and allowing them to be all that they can be in the profession that they choose, Mr. Speaker. The next thing that we have to do beside providing more classes, so we're going to have to provide classes in rural communities, Mr. Speaker, because you can't travel too far, and childcare is probably going to be more likely in the rural community. So, people have to understand the distances that we're going. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I think I'm at probably a point in time where I'm going to have to adjourn debate on this particular motion, Mr. Speaker. Seconded by the member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Shall I carry?
Carry.
The honourable member from Mallory Inverness, third party whip.
Busy day, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member from Charlottetown West Royalty, that the 29th order of the day be now read.
Shall it carry?
Carry. Order 29, an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act, Bill number 123, ordered for third reading.
The honourable member from Mallory Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member of Charlottetown West Royalty, that the said bill be now read a third time.
The honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In pursuant to Rule 71(1), I move, seconded by the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that the order for third reading of this bill be discharged for the purpose of recommitting the bill to Committee of the Whole for further consideration.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
The honourable member from Mallory Inverness. Oh, sorry. The Honourable Minister of Finance, Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, second by the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure, that this House do now resolve itself into a Committee of the Whole House to take into consideration the said bill.
Shall it carry? The Honourable member from Monaco Kilmuir to chair the Committee of the Whole House, please.
The House is now in a committee of the whole House to take into consideration a bill to be intituled An Act to Amend the Real Property Tax Act. I don't believe you have a stranger.
No, I hadn't, and I'm certainly
I'll
open
hand
to answer any more questions for third reading on this issue.
I'll give the floor over to you, member, and I think.
Okay, well, thanks very much. This is a bit abnormal, I guess, that we're into a third reading on a bill like this, but I think we've had discussions as different parties on the importance of the bill, I guess, and as well as maybe some ways that the bill can be strengthened. And certainly have always said that I'm open to those types of issues. But I will, I guess, for the record, give a bit of an update on the situation at the Ellerslie Post Office, where this sort of all originated. And we now have a new postmistress at the Ellerslie Post Office, and this is a person that was temporary in another post office that we didn't have any problems with. But so I certainly appreciate that even Canada Post rectified or said there was an issue here and rectified it. So I'm quite pleased with the fact that we do have a new postmistress at the Electoral Post Office.
Okay. The Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier.
We play hardball up west.
Thank you, Chair. I'm assuming that we're going section by section, and I have two amendments to section 1.
2 amendments to section. Yeah, we can go through them one by one.
Yep. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Jump
And we
in.
do have the original amendment as well to hand out to everyone.
The first amendment is section 1 and a new subsection 15(6) by the addition of the words, and we do have copies for everyone if you want to wait, if you want copies.
Yeah,
we'll wait. Okay.
I think I should.
You don't need it.
Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Chair. So the amendment is the addition of the words on or before the day that is 2 years after the end of the taxation year in respect of which the interest was charged or the penalty levied on application by the taxpayer in the form approved by the minister, and after the words the minister may. And deletion of the words that there were circumstances beyond the control of the person in whose name the taxes were levied or against who the penalty was levied that gave rise to taxes having been overdue and unpaid or a check having been returned as non-negotiable. And the substitution of the words that the interest or the penalty arose due to extraordinary circumstances as prescribed. So.
Any question, or member, did you have any comments?
In general terms, I guess I would say, as I read it, but maybe the minister could explain a little more what the rationale behind that changing of wording would be.
Yeah, so limiting the period during which the interest was charged, so to 2 years after the taxation year, and then requiring that the minister be satisfied on reasonable grounds that the interest or penalty arose due to extraordinary circumstances as prescribed in the regulations.
And I guess from my end, Mr. Chair, is that was the intent, is to try to deal with, allowing the minister the authority to determine what would be an extraordinary circumstance. And I guess I felt that the Minister of Finance would have that authority and capability to determine. Like I mentioned, the issue around the mail getting all sent back in one particular post office, that would be what I think she would determine, or he would determine, that was an extraordinary circumstance.
Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you. So the regulations will be drafted
correct
by consultation, and they ensure the circumstances are very clearly defined, and that it's with the help of my department, we make consistent recommendations to the minister on whether to apply the new provision in particular situations, so.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually glad the bill is back on the table. Again, I had a question to the Minister of Finance. I originally took your explanation that you couldn't accept this particular bill because you would be flooded with requests, and you gave many examples of that people basically always think their circumstances are special, you know, and deserve special consideration. How does your amendment get around that? So what made you change your position on the bill?
Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you. So the conditions and the extraordinary circumstances would be described and prescribed in the regulations, and then the minister, you know, being myself or future ministers, would, you know, take recommendation from the Department of Finance, and that they would, you know, they'd be very clearly defined so that, you know, it's not going to be willy-nilly, so to speak. You know, the department is really going to give the minister the advice.
Charlottetown Brighton.
My understanding is that you will now write in the regulation that if the bridge falls down or the mail ship burns, that you can make exceptions and that sort of thing. Force majeure conditions.
Any further questions?
No, thank you.
Any further, sorry.
And I guess just wanted to clarify a little bit, because that was always my intention. And I'd stated many times in the previous debate that the minister does have the authority to draft regulations, and that's why I did not want the legislation to be too restricting to identify certain circumstances. I felt that the minister and their department would be able to have a better comprehension of all of the issues that possibly could exist, and that they could develop regulations. And if there's future issues that come up, they also could take their leadership from the minister to determine what future regulations may happen, and those were far more simpler to implement than trying to get legislation through in a timely manner. So I appreciate that, Minister.
Shall the amendment carry?
Carried.
Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you. I have a second amendment, proposed new subsection 15(7), and we have copies for everyone.
That's I guess that's the one.
Finance and Deputy Premier.
Thank you. So the second motion and amendment is the deletion of the words which have occurred since the last report, and the substitution of the words which have occurred since the last report up to the first day of the current sitting. And by the deletion of the words, so this is B, the deletion of the words, the number of persons in whose names, and the substitution of the words, the number of properties in respect of which.
Yeah, I guess from my end, once again, this was an amendment to my amendment, so I'd probably refer to the person who moved that amendment. If they're okay with it, I certainly don't have any problems with it.
Charlottetown Belvedere.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, happy having discussed with the mover that if he's fine with it, then I'm perfectly fine with that as well. So I think everybody's on board.
Shall the amendment carry?
Carried.
Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker or Mr. Chair. The last amendment is adding a new Section 3 that provides the Act will come into force on a day that may be fixed by proclamation of the Lieutenant Governor in Council.
Once again, I guess I was kind of going general assumptions that obviously the minister would have to do some regulations, do some work, and that they would determine when the appropriate time to make this legislation legal and to apply to policy. Once again, I certainly have no problems with that and would appreciate that. I would hope I would ask some sense of expediency in trying to proclaim it, but I have faith in this minister and that they would do it in the appropriate time and fashion.
Any further questions on this amendment? Shall the amendment carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry?
Yeah, I end it. It does show the power of the Legislative Assembly in working together to try to come up with something that solves a particular problem, so in one particular riding.
One way or the other.
Smooth.
I move the title.
An act to amend the Real Property Tax Act. Shall it carry?
I move the enacting clause.
Be it enacted by the Lieutenant Governor and the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Prince Edward Island as follows. Shall it carry?
Mr. Chair, I move the Speaker take the chair and the chair report the bill agreed to with amendment.
Shall it carry? Mr. Speaker, as chair of a committee of the whole House, having had under consideration a bill to be intituled an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act, I beg leave to report that the committee has gone through the said bill and has agreed to same with amendment. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry?
Carry.
Emily, where do I sign? Emily. Corey. Okay. The honourable member from O'Leary, Inverness, and the third-party whip.
Mr. Speaker, I move seconded by the member from Charlottetown West Royalty that Bill number 123 be now read a third time.
Shall it carry?
Bill number 123, an act to amend the Real Property Tax Act, read a third time.
The honourable member from O'Leary, Inverness, third-party whip.
Mr. Speaker, I move seconded by the member for Charlottetown West Royalty that the said bill do now pass.
Shall it carry? Honourable members, this is a bill introduced by leave of the House, read a first time, read a second time, committed to the committee of the whole House, reported, agreed with, amendment, recommended, recommitted to a committee of the whole House to consider additional amendments, reported, agreed to with amendments, read a third time, and is now moved that the bill do not pass. All those in favour say yea. Yea. Contrary, nay. Bill is carried. Honourable member. The Honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty and the third party House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now call motion number 109.
Shall it carry? Is this a new one? Honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Motion number 109, promoting wellness.
Can't.
The member for Charlottetown West Royalty moves, seconded by the leader of the third party, the following motion. Whereas wellness promotion is a proactive and key aspect to the overall public health of Prince Edward Island residents. And whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted the importance of taking care of one's well-being. And whereas the 2021 Chief Public Health Officer's report indicates a need to focus attention in PEI to halt or change existing trends related to mental health, unhealthy eating, physical inactivity, smoking, and vaccine uptake among grade 9 students specifically. And whereas government has committed to investment of $25 million over 5 years to the Active Transportation Fund, dedicated to creating new and enhancing existing active transportation infrastructure. And whereas the investments made into active transportation infrastructure provides government an opportunity to utilize these areas for wellness promotion programming across Prince Edward Island. And whereas wellness promotion programming requires involvement across government departments to ensure initiatives offered pose no barriers to access and optimize the overall impact and reach of the initiative. Therefore be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge government to utilize their investments for government organized wellness promotion activities. Therefore be it further resolved, the Legislative Assembly acknowledge the importance in collaboration among government departments to ensure wellness programming offered is accessible, educational, and effective. And therefore be it further resolved that the Legislative Assembly urge the Minister of Health and Wellness, in collaboration with other ministers, to develop and implement a robust wellness strategy for Prince Edward Island.
The Honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty to start debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to rise and obviously talk about wellness. I've talked about it in the legislature before, and I think it's incredibly important now at our time in history. And when you look at wellness, you look at the Minister of Health and Wellness has the title right in his name, but yet funding does not support an equal division towards wellness. And that is the key when we talk about different things in this legislature about, we talk about upstream, we talk about where our funding's going. And this motion is brought forward because of a lack of action by our government around wellness. It's that simple. And strong messaging from our Chief Public Health Office who talked about some serious issues that are facing Islanders. The 2021 Chief Public Health Officer report indicated the need to focus on attention to halt or change existing trends related to mental health. And we'll just stop there. Trends related to mental health is a serious issue, especially after and during the pandemic, especially for our children, especially for our kids growing up. We do not know how they will respond to various things that they've been through, various moments of isolation in their brief childhood. Various students in an education system have missed important moments, have missed little things like their first dance and their graduation, to not have the fanfare there and not to react to that. And when you look at mental health, and when you look at what they're facing, and those are just a couple of examples. How do you combat that? I think you shower them with love and care, and you show them as a society that we care about them. And there's a few different ways you can do that. But it's their mental health that's increasingly of concern, especially for the younger age kids. I mean, thinking back to when you're a child, could you have sat in your room for 10 days in a row? 10 days in a row sometimes, or 14 days in a row by yourself. Yes, there's technology, but to keep people occupied and to have a look at things. But think about the inactivity that those children might have missed during that time. They're not getting up and putting on a video to exercise. They're home alone and they're using technology. Well, have we allowed our children to become more and more addicted to that technology by doing so? I don't know. But I know a way that we have to encourage them to get out and do more things. That will combat their mental health, the socialization of being together, about doing things together as a group, playing whatever sports, dancing. I mean, if they want to use technology, I mean, you look at the videos and the dances that kids might do on TikTok. That's getting active. That's being active. That's using technology with your friends. Those things are positive. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. And we've got to make sure our kids are at the forefront of what we're building as a society. And I look at the pages today. They've gotten more activity. The pages in here have gotten more activity helping us, than we have. We don't move very much in here. We don't even press our feet into the ground as legislators. We're just sitting here. We need to move more. We need to move more. We need to move together, and we need to show our constituents that that's important. And it's things like our unhealthy eating. As I was putting this motion together, I thought about how can I talk about unhealthy eating in our society, and I just said, you know what? Think about your grandparents, even your great-great-grandparents, and imagine if they, in their prime, when they're 32 or 33 years old, imagine them picking up the phone and calling Skip the dishes. It doesn't make any sense. They made their meals. They went out and got their food. They went out and used everything in the cupboard. They ate healthy because there was no choice. They needed to put food on the table. Right now, we can hit 2 buttons on our phone and have whatever we want delivered to our house. And it's called Skip the Dishes. That notion of that title of that company is so lazy that we can't even do our own dishes, not only make our own food. And my point is, that's how easy things have gotten for us. And that's how difficult it is to eat healthy, when you can order anything you want and have it to wherever you are in a matter of seconds. And that's what we're facing in our unhealthy eating in our province. And I'm telling you, our bodies can't handle that, because what we're doing is we're eating, and then all of a sudden we're just saying, okay, you know what, I had a treat day, but we're doing it again the next day and the next day and the next day. We don't ever stop to say, whoa, I need to eat healthy because I only have one body and it's mine and I need to take care of it. And these are 2 of the major things. And then we see things about alcohol use in our province. Spring is coming, summer is coming, socials are coming, and which are all incredibly important. But when do we say as residents, we've had too much to drink? We've had enough today. And those are the things I'm worried about. And in Prince Edward Island, we do have a problem with alcohol. And I want to make sure that people think about that and think about having those conversations in their own families and life. And these type of things, Mr. Speaker, have gotten increasingly worse with the pandemic. So here we are, 2 years into a pandemic. We don't know where we're going from a wellness standpoint, because I'll tell you, we don't have a plan. And to have this, we have to bring up this motion about just a simple wellness strategy, a plan. It might sound simple. We haven't had one since 2018. There's no direction. And I'm looking at the Minister of Health, because I've talked about it. I've written his messages. I've read his messages in the floor of the legislature. I don't understand. I can't get any clear answers about what we're doing in health promotion as a province. So this is an opportunity for this government to say, stop wasting your time, because you've been at this for 3 years and haven't done anything for wellness. And I say that there have been certain things. This government might be coming around. You see the active transportation trails, good. You see the Minister of Action or Climate Action start to say, hey, let's work on some bicycle refurbishment programs, good. You saw the Minister of Education and I, as much as people laugh about Winter Wellness Day, the 900 kids I exercised with that day weren't laughing. It's the first time they were able to be in a group together. At Birchwood, the place was packed. Everybody had their masks on. The member from Charlottetown, Winslow, we experienced a great moment at West Royalty School for the first time, training with about 350 kids. And that was a first. We almost passed out because we had our masks on. We were working a little bit too hard. But it was a special moment, and it was neat to be there. Those aren't little things. Went down to Park Street School. Unbelievable event with the kids outside. Unbelievable. Queen Charlotte, same thing. Colonel Gray, I finished up the day at Colonel Gray, and the kids did it unbelievable. High school students. You know, these are things we have to do more of, but we need a strategy to know where we're going and how we're going to do that. When I look down and see a health promotion budget that only spent $8,000 out of $106,000, Mr. Speaker, $8,000 coming out of a pandemic, it makes 0 sense. And the answer back was, we didn't have conferences. We don't need conferences. We need you to figure out how you're going to spend that money to help the health of Islanders. That's upstream, and you wasted the opportunity. Not to mention $106,000 is not enough. $108,000, 106, 108, I don't have the numbers in front of me, it doesn't matter. You're looking at, look at that line. We underspent by $96,000. I didn't vote for that section in the budget because I didn't understand how this could happen. I don't understand how you can not spend health promotion money. It has no meaning. It doesn't mean anything not to spend that money. When you look at a simple thing, when you look at the work our therapists do in the hospital, you know what can be successful for them when people get to the stage where in the hospital they need care? Just sometimes turning them over, Mr. Speaker, can mean a lot to them. Is activity, is physiotherapy. Up from the bed to the chair, from the chair to standing, from standing to walking. These are what therapists do. And that is at the basic level where you need care the most. That is the simple things that they focus on, and it's a good thing they do it, because little victories can mean a lot. You go down the spectrum. What are we doing? What is your parents doing for activity? Maybe they can just get their hands up a little bit today. Maybe it can be they can get up. But if they stop moving, that is the worst thing people can do. And I don't want to tell you what happens after you lose mobility, because the whole body stops functioning. And this is the continuum. It starts from an early age, and it moves right up. This is wellness. This is just taking activity and trying to say, hey, activity and eating, if we just change those two things and we do it every day, we can live a better quality of life. And that's really what it's about. We all know our fates in the grand scheme of things, but how you live is important. And it doesn't always have to, social time can be about being active with each other, using the active transportation trails, and not necessarily going out and having alcohol. We have to change our mindset. And those people who risk nothing risk even more. If you risk nothing, you risk even more. And I think about how the changes of my good friend, the leader of the third party, and what he went through just a little while ago, and what that did for me, and what I did when I thought he was in trouble, because I care about him. And you know, he came back, and I see this gentleman being healthier. I see this gentleman trying, and I respect and admire this gentleman for it. And I know he got good care along the way, but he's using that opportunity to better himself. And that is what wellness is all about. And I try to encourage him every step along the way. We have to do that on a larger scale. We have to do that with our children. We have to do that with our neighbors. And we have to get everybody moving. But most of all, Mr. Speaker, going back to this motion, we need guidance. We need leadership, and we need solid investment to make sure that our government is, and I know the Minister of Health cares a lot about this. I do, I understand. I have had good conversations with him. But what I need him to do is go back into his department and say, this is one of the pillars that I stand for. This is what I'm going to do in my legacy piece in the Department of Health and Wellness. And I know there's people watching this right now over there. They work hard. They work hard. But the biggest problem, and being in the service delivery industry for the last 25 years of my life, is that providing services out there that get people healthier. That's hard. And I know you can do it, and I know you will do it. And you have the power, you have, in this situation, you have the power as the minister to influence all your other departments. Education, climate and action, transportation. It goes on and on. People need to be healthier. You know, the Minister of Agriculture talks about a wellness program for farmers and fishermen to work on their mental health. Well, how do we encourage that? How do you encourage that in your wellness strategy? Okay, it relates all across the board, and the time is now to do it. You know, we've been at this for 3 years. We've been at this in here, this group, and we're almost a family. We're almost a family in here. We've been at it for 3 years. This next year is important. This next year is very important because we are coming hopefully out of a pandemic, and people weathered that pandemic in different ways. They need support in different ways. The best announcement I've seen in the last little while is that long-term care facilities are opening up. And I know they've been open for a little bit, but to see that is there, and I encourage all Islanders, they have had it very difficult. I think a PE home. I used to go in there, Mr. Speaker, once a week. Once a week for years I went in there. We didn't do much. We just put music on, music that they remembered, and they just moved. Some of them had some pretty good naps during that time, but they came and they participated, and they did whatever they could. And little things, maybe they could only move one leg. That's wellness. That's being active. We need more programming like that, and we need it to go into the places that have struggled the most in Prince Edward Island. There's incredible service delivery providers here in Prince Edward Island, and I know because I see them, and they've struggled. They haven't said anything, they've struggled. They've struggled with this. And they hold the key because they can train people in mass amounts of people. So I encourage the minister to reach out to different private sector where they're getting people healthier and support them. Figure out what they need to support to get them out and through the pandemic, because access to exercise, access to activity is key for our province, and we can do better on it. You know, you see yesterday a great motion coming forward from the Green Party yesterday about cycling, and it was incredible. We need to take that a step further in the sense that it's part of the wellness strategy. It's part of getting bicycles on the road. It's part of the refurbishment of bicycles. It's part of getting people to use those without excuses. If I said, let's go out together as a group, there's more of a chance we're going to go across the Hillsborough Bridge if I'm with somebody rather than alone. You have to go out and do that. You have to go on an adventure. You have to call people up and say, here's what we're doing today. That's wellness. That's activity. That can be supported through the government. And that's why yesterday when I had the opportunity to speak a little bit to the motion, I said we need a memorial run for Josh and Oliver. You can imagine a non-competitive race where we meet at the Reach Center in Stratford. Think about it, 500-600 people on bicycles, and with the goal to get across the Hillsborough Bridge. That was his legacy, to put that piece in there. I remember him talking about that. It is there now. Wouldn't it be amazing to have 1,000 Islanders traveling across that bridge safely? Okay, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. That is what I would like this government to do, and I would help you on that any step of the way. But I think if we talk about it, thinking outside of the box, it's a simple solution, but we're thinking outside of the box. We're making people healthier, and we're encouraging them to get going. I was excited about the kinesiology department. We have a kinesiology department here. If you come out of university with the kinesiology, we talk about nurses, we talk about OTs, we talk about physios. We need to stop the trend when people get out of a kinesiology degree. We need to be going to recruit them. We need to go and get them moving people in our communities. Okay, that can be done. So get them involved in it, the kinesiology department. And they came out with some incredible data. around education that can really help. I think we need to look at that and use our great resources here and use our programs at Holland College around activity and get people out. When you're thinking about investments too in the active transportation system, again, yes, start to think about branching off, connecting those little things, connecting those communities, connecting people where they live to the trails, and they can get moving. The only reason, and I'll be honest with you, Mr. Speaker, the only reason I didn't take my car to work today is I forgot my keys. I couldn't find them, actually. I couldn't find my keys. So what do? And I had the luxury to just get up and just walk to the bus stop. I would have walked the whole way, but I was running a little bit late. Okay, sometimes we need to forget our keys in life and just figure out how we can get to where we're going to get to, walking, getting there, doing things without the ease of transportation all the time. That's how we build a better future. When we looked at the Department of Education, Health, Social Development, Transportation, these are all connectors. And Minister, I think that you should call a mini meeting with them and just with this topic and see where the ideas go, because it could be glorious. But one thing I want you to work on and go back to the money that we didn't spend in health promotion, take it out of that. And I know it's harder said than done. Take it out of that and spend it. And when the budget gets up to $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 in health promotion, keep it there. Fight to keep it there, because we haven't spent it. And I want to see it being spent. Islanders want to see it be spent. I think you can do it. I think you want to do it. I just want to end with, before I pass the floor to the seconder, is that this is a very simple motion. I mean, make sure, Minister, that we have a wellness strategy as a top priority of yours, and start to invest and start to think about how we get Islanders healthy. It's not necessarily about the money. It's what you do with the money that impacts Islanders. When I'm seeing one program in the budget have more money than Sport PEI, there's something weird there. Make sure that money goes into helping Islanders from tip to tip at any stage at all. You can be more healthy, and you hold the key. I'm asking you to be creative, plan, and do this across government. Be accountable with what you do, because if we invest now, you won't see the returns for a little bit, but we will have combated some of our mental health issues. We would have looked at trying to be healthier as a community and moving upstream, and that's what it's going to take. So just in closing, Mr. Speaker, those people who risk nothing risk even more. Make sure you're somebody who's taking a risk with your own wellness, a risk to pick up the phone and call somebody to make your life healthier and to make people around you, especially our families, healthier. Coming out of COVID, there is very little that's more important. And remember the people that have struggled the most. And sometimes a nice spring walk with somebody who wasn't going to go can make the difference. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly a pleasure to stand and second this motion brought forward by my colleague from Charlottetown, West Royalty. I want to thank him for bringing this motion forward and for his dedication to wellness, in promoting wellness in the province. And you know, when I first met Gord and we used to watch him doing his exercise classes, I used to nicely tease him and say, gee, you didn't comb your hair today, or something like that. And then when I had my own health issues, I didn't even nicely tease him anymore. I thought, you know, Gord's doing a wonderful thing here.
Second time.
I'm sorry. Sorry, okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty, I stopped teasing him in a fun way when I realized the importance of what he was doing. And it is so important, and his passion is unbelievable, as you heard here today, and we see it every day in our caucus. As I had indicated, I was happy to second this motion in the House, and I got quite a scare in my own cardiovascular issues not that long ago, and it certainly opened my eyes to what Gord was doing. You know, I had I'm sorry, the honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty. You know, I have the gym equipment home in my basement that I looked at every day and we dust it off. Never got to use it, but I use it now. Not as much as I should yet, but I try to get out with the dog and go for a walk, eat differently, look at what I can do, and it just, my life has changed, and it took something serious for that to happen. I saw the signs, I thought, I'll do that, but I put it off and I put it off. I encourage people to get active. I say to people, and I was very fortunate, I didn't have to have any surgery. I got my second chance, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for all the support I got in this legislature, support I got from my caucus, and Gord was tremendous support through that. The member from Charlottetown West Royalty was tremendous support through that, and I thank you all for that. Seeing the statistics really bothered me, and we look at the opportunities that we are and how privileged we are here in PEI and the geography we have in this province, like as far as active transportation and doing things. You know, we have vast amount of walking trails no matter where you live, and we're not far from the beach if you want to go swimming, but I wouldn't recommend it these days. Our roads are being made more safer for biking and walking, and so on, not to mention the investments made by the government to expand our active transportation trails in PEI, which primarily based on this motion. I also just want to touch on the part of this motion that identifies the issues raised by our Chief Public Health Office in regards to issues affecting our children: mental health, unhealthy eating, physical inactivity, and smoking, to name a few. I worry for the children growing up in today's world for many reasons, such as affordability, access to health care and housing, and just in general, with the ever-changing world we find ourselves in. There's more distractions and challenges that our children face today than ever before. It seems that gone are the days where our parents would lock us out of the house until the street lights come on, forcing us to be more active. And if we got called in for a meal and missed it, well, we didn't eat until we came in the house. Sometimes we didn't eat when we came in the house. Today we see children not being as active and having excessive amounts of screen time, which can lead to many issues, including issues regarding their mental health. As we know, not everything children see on social media platforms and the way they communicate on these platforms is always positive, and in part contributes to those mental health challenges. In saying that, I'm happy to see that these initiatives are being included in this motion, because we really do need to drastically change our approach in this province to align with the modern lifestyles of children these days. I think it's important to also note that we need to adapt our thinking and strategies to complement the interests of our children in all areas and move forward from the old school ways of thinking that in order for children to be healthy and happy, we need to force organized sports on them. There are many more ways for our children to be active. I do want to acknowledge the investments that were made by this government into the active transportation network. $25 million over 5 years will certainly make a difference and provide the funds for much needed infrastructure. But as the member from Charlottetown West Royalty points out, we need to ensure that we are seeing benefits from this investment. Simply building it and hoping they will come has not proved to be beneficial for this government. This government is notorious for outsourcing and taking a hands-off approach with many services they provide. The hope is that with this motion passing, that will not be the case when it comes to this topic. Government needs to be a leader and lead by example. We have many dedicated public servants and health experts in this province that could easily take on this role. It has been raised many times by our caucus, and based on most recent CPHO report, PEI is exceeding the national average when it comes to the leading causes of death in relation to chronic illnesses like heart disease. Seeing these statistics really bothered me when you look at the opportunities that we are privileged to have, as I mentioned earlier, in this province. And Mr. Speaker, I certainly wanted to second this motion, and I will I would like to adjourn debate, sir. Second by the honourable member from Charlottetown West Royalty.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Minister of Finance Deputy Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Minister of Fisheries and Communities, that the first order of the day be now read.
Should it carry?
Carried. Order number 1, consideration of the estimates in committee.
The Honourable Minister of Finance Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move, seconded by the Minister of Fisheries and Communities, that this House do now resolve itself into committee the whole House to take into consideration grant of supply to Her Majesty.
Should it carry?
Carried.
The Honourable Member from Monaco Kilmore, Chair of the Committee of the Whole House, please.
The House is now in a committee of the whole House to consider the grant of supply to Her Majesty. The request has been made to bring a stranger on the floor. Shall it be granted? What page were we on? All set? No. You ready to go? If you could introduce yourself and title for Hansard, please.
Kelly Haas, Chief Financial Officer with Health PEI.
Thank you, Kelly. And we are on page 122, Public Health and Children's Developmental Services. And on our list is Mermaid Stratford.
Sorry. So in this section, where we left off as we were talking about funding for vaccines, when we look at the amount that is forecasted, so we've spent $1.3 million last year, but we only have $165,000 forecasted for this year. And you had mentioned that the COVID vaccine was part of the costs of this section. Can you tell me why it's such a small amount, given that we do have a fairly low percentage of people that are vaccinated that are in this age group?
So the forecasted value that you speak of represents the cost to support the vaccine delivery. The cost for the vaccine itself reside within CPHO. The COVID costs Health PEI incurred are offset by COVID contingency revenue. So the budget for 22-23 does not include funding for the COVID response. Health PEI is required to seek approval for COVID contingency funds to support the delivery of our COVID response accordingly.
Mermaid Stratford.
That's good. I'm fine. Thanks, Chair.
Charlottetown, Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate place to ask about this or not, but I'm wondering if this is where we would find the funding for the 4-year-old assessments through public health. It is where, okay, sorry. I don't know what I was waiting for there. That was a very clear answer. So a question that came up in conversations with people, the early years evaluation for children entering kindergarten, is that through health as well, or would that be through the education budget? I don't have that title. We have the New Beginnings program, the Launch and Little Ones program, school health program. Okay.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to throw a suggestion at you. So the public health, the 4-year-old assessments that we do, obviously we're looking for certain outcomes and we're measuring for certain things, and that's done when they're 4. And then within the same year, we do an early years evaluation for entering kindergarten. How much money do we spend on the 4-year-old assessments through your department? I may not have a breakdown of that 4-year assessment because the people that provide that care and service provide other things as well. So it's that overall value of the nursing, but I'll just take a quick peek to see if I have a further breakdown. No, I don't have that level breakdown with me here. Okay.
Charlottetown Victoria Park.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really curious how much we do spend on that, and I'll have to do a little bit more digging to find out what we spend on the early years evaluation, because it seems to me that we'd be measuring perhaps not the same things, but why we couldn't roll those into one assessment, because they all get them anyway. And so it's important to have the public health information, while it might not be relevant for schools specifically. At the same time, it is fairly relevant, because then we get a better understanding of where they are developmentally, any health issues they may have that may impact their learning. So to me, it had never even occurred to me, even though I was in the school system for how many years and had children of my own who went through these assessments. So that might be something to consider through the departments, is how you could combine those. And maybe there's a very legit reason why we do 2 separate ones. I just can't imagine what those would be. So just to throw a suggestion in there, why don't we do that, and then we can hire some more mental health counselors with that money. Anyway, I would love to see how much money we do spend in there, and that's all for now.
We can certainly bring that information back, and certainly appreciate your feedback and your suggestion there.
Shall the section carry? Provincial dental programs, appropriations provided for services to achieve and maintain good dental health care under the Provincial Dental Care Program. Administration, $32,500. Equipment, $11,900. Materials, supplies, and services, $90,100. Professional services, $4,987,100. Salaries, $2,398,000. Travel and training, $46,200. Total provincial dental program, $7,565,800. Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Minister, for being here, and thank you, Stranger, too. Clearly, this section has particular poignancy for me and importance, and I'm delighted, of course, to see the significant increase in funding for the dental program and the expansion and enhancement of services to islanders that represents. And I have a couple of questions. The first one would be regarding the previous program, which I hesitate to call it a children's program, but it essentially covered kids up until the age of 17. And it was not means tested, and all island kids, unless you had a private dental insurance, would have qualified for the program. And I want to make absolutely clear that in the changes and that have occurred here, that is going to remain so for all island children. So that's my question. Has the new dental program in any way restricted access for island children?
Chair, that is something that was brought to my attention, Honourable Member. Direction was given to staff that this oversight needed to be addressed and will be. I think just to briefly touch on it as well, though, is as we see, and certainly timeline on the passage of the federal budget, but one of the initiatives there is a national dental care program. So the two things I think that we certainly have to recognize, be cognizant of, is that we do, with this program, with the PEI program, as I understand, it's one of the best, if not the best, programs in Canada. So we don't want to sacrifice any of that in any way, shape, or form when the new federal program does come in, which I certainly anticipate that the federal budget will be passed. But we need to build upon that, and any gaps that are identified, to use that funding to fill those gaps.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. It's really important that we don't conflate two things. And I do have some questions about the potential impact of the federal program on our provincial program, and I absolutely agree with you. I would put our provincial public dental program against any other province in this country, and I would say that we do have the best program. And I'm really glad that government responded to the request from the official opposition to expand this dental program. Again, something dear to my heart, and I'm delighted to see this. But again, I'll ask the question, a very specific question, and you said in your answer there that this oversight needs to be addressed. So that suggests to me that there was some element of this new program which restricted access for kids previously. Is that the case?
As I understand, and certainly Kelly jump in here, but the previous program was not income tested, correct? And that was the one that was under the children's program, and I believe it was under SDH. With that, when it come over and you looked at market basket measure and then sliding scale, inadvertently, I have to say, that was incorporated into the children's portion of it as well. And like say, Honourable Member, Leader of the Opposition, when that was brought to my attention as an oversight, the direction to the department and through ultimately Health PEI is that needs to be looked after.
Leader of the Opposition.
Great. I'm really, really happy to hear that, Minister. A couple of people have reached out to me in the dental community concerned that this inadvertently, as you put it, an oversight has created a diminution of that children's program, which, you know, having worked with it, I saw the value of that. I mean, every day I saw the value of that in my practice. So I guess my question is for a very definitive answer from you that this oversight or this inadvertent loss which has occurred when you changed over to the new program, that you're going to rectify that and that all children under 17 will qualify for public dental services regardless of the family income?
With that, when we look at any program, any new programs coming in, personally to me, any component of that new program, Honourable Member, should be at least as good as the previous program that was rolled into it. So what I will state unequivocally is that the program
through the previous department that was rolled into the provincial dental care program will be as good, if not better, than the previous.
Leader of the Opposition.
I have some comfort in your answer there, Minister, but again, I just want to be absolutely clear that there will be no loss of services for island children under 17 when this new program, I think it's the end of June or beginning of June, where it completely supersedes the children's program.
Chair, I'm not sure, excuse me, and I do appreciate where the Leader of the Opposition is coming from. I guess two things that I would say there is I'm not sure how I can be any clearer than that it will be at least as good, that there's not going to be a decrease come that point in time. And the second...
I'm sorry, just again, specifically for island children 17 and under?
Yes, that were covered under the previous program.
Okay.
That's right. The second thing that I would add in there is that, again, in negotiations, discussions with the federal government, when the federal budget is passed, that first and foremost, there cannot be any deterioration or decrease in the benefits provided to islanders. And secondly is that to build as much as possible as a result of the federal program on the great program that we do have here in the province.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Chair. And I do take that as a very clear yes to my answer as to the children will continue to be covered regardless of household income. And I very much appreciate that, because it was never our intention when we brought forward a request to expand and enhance this dental program that it would in any way diminish the already existing program that existed for kids. So I'm really pleased to have that on the record that that will not be the case. We don't know, of course, the details of the federal program yet. You've mentioned that a couple of times in your answers to my previous questions. And I think what many of us would like to see is the funding which would flow from the federal government specifically for dental programming would be as much of the healthcare funding is without strings attached, and the provincial government would be able to administer and distribute those funds as it sees fit. Is that what you're advocating for as health minister when you speak to your federal counterparts?
With that, there are very preliminary discussions ongoing between staff in my department and federal, but I guess at this point in time that it's a bit premature, I would have to say, and the leader may disagree with me, but that is my take as minister, to get into those in-depth discussions. I think one of the things, though, that I feel as minister with regard to healthcare funding, and it doesn't matter whether it's a new program that is coming through the federal government with regard to a federal dental care program or any program, that the more autonomy as a province that we can have in the utilization of those funds, who knows better than collectively the legislatures in here and our staff as to what the best use of those funds are.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Chair. So we have dedicated funding here of $7.5 million, provincial dollars, for this program. If I do the math on the entire federal program, and I don't disagree with you, Minister, I do understand this is early days and it would be unreasonable for me to ask for a definitive answer on exactly what you're going to do with the money. But if I do the math on what we would expect to receive from the federal program, it comes in about $7 or $8 million per annum. So I just want to make sure that we're not going to take the federal money and then use it instead of this provincial money, that the federal money will be used to enhance and, again, expand the program that we have, rather than just replace the provincial dollars.
I think, again, it would be premature of me to say just how those federal dollars are going to roll out. We're definitely on the same page that it is the more autonomy that we can have as a province, It would be probably premature, though, for me to state unequivocally, not knowing what the parameters are that the federal program are going to entail there. But absolutely, from my perspective, is we take what we have here in the budget, and I have to put some qualification on it or quantification on it, not knowing what the details that we are ultimately going to be able to arrange. But my view, my vision is to take what we have here, the federal dollars that do come down, and to build on what we have here to bring it up to here.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. I think that's a very fair answer, Minister, given the circumstances that we are all living in here regarding this. And I appreciate the commitment as far as you were able to go, given the unknowns that we have. And I will obviously be keeping a close eye on this and no doubt asking more questions as we carry on. I just want to look at the difference between the budget estimate and forecast for the prior year, where we underspent by about $750,000. Was that because the program was later in becoming established than we had originally hoped? Right.
Leader of the Opposition.
So when I look at if you can extrapolate for, and I don't know exactly how many months the program ran for in the current budget cycle, but is the $7.5 million, if you extrapolate from what we spent this year, is that going to be sufficient funds to cover the demands of the program? Again, as far as you can tell, I understand we can't be certain about that.
So based on the program as it was presented, there is a plan for additional funding to support the program of $1.4 million for the 23-24 fiscal year.
Leader of the Opposition.
Right. So the question was, looking at how much we spent in a portion of the last year, if we, let's say 6 months and we spent $4 million, this year it's 12 months and we have $7.5 million, that would work because the numbers are, they're comparable. And I just want to make sure that we do have enough in the budget there to meet the demands of islanders who are, by the way, without exception, I've had people reaching out to me thanking government for coming forward with this program and allowing them, after many, many, many years of not being able to take care of their teeth, which are an integral part of their overall health, of being able to do that and not having to worry about does that mean I'm not going to be able to make my car payment or put food on the table or pay for my children's soccer, whatever. So I really want to thank you for that. And I think this is a huge benefit to islanders. And I look forward to this program continuing to be enhanced in the future. Thank you, Minister. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Shall the section carry?
Carried.
Home care, palliative, and geriatric care. Appropriations provided for operation of the home care and support program, the standalone palliative care facility, and the provincial geriatrician program. Administration, $202,100. Equipment, $35,300. Materials, supplies, and services, $1,165,100. Professional services, $2,462,900. Salaries, $27,887,500. Travel and training, $853,200. Total home care, palliative, and geriatric care, $32,606,100. Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome back, Ellie. Thank you for being here. I wanted to ask questions on the mobile integrated health. So that's about $500,000 underspent last year. Can you tell me why that was underspent?
Just one second. look at the MIH program, there was a late start to the portion of rapid bridging, which is hospital and emergency departments supporting the discharge for individuals at risk for rehospitalization, but it began and was fully implemented January 10th, 2022.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, so that was about, when was it supposed to launch?
I believe that was supposed to be a mid-year start. I do have a document that I can go back and look at. Do have that with me. It's buried a little bit. I can take that back.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mid-year start.
Mermaid Stratford.
And can you just tell me the name of that program again? I put my headset in a little late.
It was called Rapid Bridging.
Okay,
Mermaid Stratford.
thank you. Okay. The health equipment loan program, we spent $310,000. The budget's going back down to what it was forecasted for the previous year. And I just have to say that that's an incredible program, right? That is something that you don't realize until you're in that situation, just how much it costs to have a loved one lose mobility and to have the dignity of being able to function every day. And the medical equipment that is provided from the Canadian Red Cross Society is instrumental to being able to allow people to age at home. So, but my understanding is there's not always equipment available when it's needed. And so have you done an assessment on that program to see where we can beef up that equipment loan program so that the items that are required and may not be available, like on a more frequent basis, could be purchased and be more readily available? I think it's instrumental to keeping people at home. So just like hospital beds and stuff like that would be some of those items, right?
Correct. So my understanding with that program is there's very close contact with the leaders responsible for that program within the home care division and an understanding of that. And that is base funding on an annual basis that is provided to them for the purchase of equipment.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
All right. And I only ask because, you know, when I spoke to an OT, for instance, who was working with elders trying to stay at home, and it was always based on whether the equipment's available. So I'd hate to see for somebody to not be able to age at home because of the financial requirement to be able to have that equipment, which is substantial. I mean, just like a chairlift, for instance, can be a couple $1,000s, and a walker can be $300. Like that's a lot of money, and I know we need to try to move more towards people aging at home. So any assessment on that program, like just even asking people who work in it to make sure that there is enough equipment available would be, I think, valuable to people who need it. So there's some areas around that have no spend under the consulting fees, so but have been budgeted last year and budgeted again this year. So the case management training, the rural palliative home care project, integrated health, those consulting fees were never spent last year. Were they all deferred, or why was there no spending in that area?
So I believe you're looking at the Home First and Self-Managed Care. Is that the one you're looking at?
Everything under the consulting fees. Like the only thing that was actually spent was the French language program, which wasn't actually budgeted in the first place.
Just one moment. We're continued with those projects, but consulting wasn't required for that time period.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, but will it be continuing going forward into this year with the funding?
Yes.
Okay. Overall, just the program, home care, palliative care, I mean, we recognize that there are no long-term care beds being built, like in the public system. There's very few that are being added. So home care really is instrumental in people aging with dignity, and many aging at home. So I realize that there's about a $2 million increase in the funding here. Can you, when was this last, the whole program last assessed to see if we're actually meeting the needs? If a elder needed potentially 2 hours but is only getting 1 hour because of assessing how much time we actually have. Because my understanding is resourcing is an issue, right? Like with everything, we have shortages of human resources. And so are we funding that enough? And is there more that we can do in that system, in that program? I guess, did you request more money for that program and maybe it wasn't approved, or?
So when we look at the investments in this section, rather than kind of going by each of those categories, one of the investments was increased provincial home care services for the coach, the care at home. Home-based and restorative care within this budget is $1.163 million. And it provided 30 additional coach spaces, which is about 16 FTEs. A day program expansion, staffing, approximately 9 FTEs. And for restorative care, 6 additional FTEs.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, so overall, from Health PEI's perspective in trying to maintain a program and really grow it because we have an aging population, has there been enough funding in this section in order to meet the needs of Health PEI to be able to grow that and work with that aging population?
There is, first I'll say yes, but this is an area that definitely is viewed, that additional funding would certainly be very beneficial. In reviewing our spend for last year and reviewing and considering vacancies, we certainly took that into consideration and making sure that the funding that we requested, we certainly could implement those initiatives within the fiscal year. So we look very seriously at that because we certainly don't want to request funding that we cannot implement those resources accordingly.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
I'm good for now, thanks, Chair.
O'Leary and Burness.
Just a couple of questions here regarding under laundry and cleaning services under this section, quite a significant increase, 16,800. So what is that? Are you getting somebody to privately come in and clean a certain facility, or is it a service that you're like contracting out because you can't keep up with the laundry services? Just to give me a sense of that.
It's more of a contracted out for that home care service.
O'Leary and Burness.
So when you mean home care service, so you'd contract somebody, so if there was a person who that home care is working with and they know they can't clean their home or clean their clothes or something like that, that you'd contract somebody to come in and do that for them? Is that what you mean?
Part of it is, I understand, but I can verify, it's cleaning for the facility that the home care staff occupy and different things like that is a portion of it.
So
O'Leary and Burness.
So that seems to be quite an increase. I mean, you budgeted 5,300, you spent 97. Now it's I'm assuming it's a contract for 16,800.
Let's take a peek at that.
I'm just the section says professional fees, laundry and cleaning services. So 16,800 is the number that's on there. So was that a tendered thing that the tenders all come in that much higher, or just some explanation to that number that jumps out at me? In the book, in the book that I've been given here, it says grants and professional services, health PEI, page 9, 16,800 is the number that for laundry and cleaning services.
Yes, so I don't have any additional details with me on that, but I would be happy to bring that back.
Larry Inverness.
So I know one of the things during my time as minister, there was the whole issue about laundry services in our hospitals and healthcare and things of that nature, and contracting out and all those kinds of things. So I guess I just wanted to verify that that doesn't sound like that's the case, and if it is just for home care and support the offices, I can say I understand that, but it'd be nice to know. Okay. And I guess my other point I wanted to reiterate a bit is the same with the HELP program. If I look at that number, that 235,000, and last year you spent 310 as the forecast, I would only assume that your demands are going to even be higher, and I'll even assume that the expenses may be higher. So that equipment needs to be upgraded from time to time. So I know this isn't a question per se, but I do question that number and saying that it doesn't seem to be enough. So I just wanted to put my comment in there, because once again that service is provided to the community hospital in O'Leary, and I'm generally hearing great work that they do, and for issues even like setting up a bed, like a hospital bed, and one of my friends, we both, Minister and I both have, he accessed that service, and it was great for them to come set that up. I would only think that demand is only going to increase, and I just hope the resources will be there should they be required. So I guess that's all I have on that section for now, Chair.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to come back to the Mobile Integrated Health Program. So that rapid bridging program, and I know, Kelly, I hate to put you on the spot, I just want to make sure I capture everything that might be brought back if we can't locate it. But that rapid bridging program, is that completely, is that a contract that's out to Island EMS? Or is there somebody else that is providing that service?
MIH is provided, and there's a contract with Island EMS.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. So specifically for that rapid bridging, is that a separate contract that was newly issued to them?
It's an overall contract with them. Let's see.
And just to clarify my question, Chair, if I could, that the underspend in the 500,000 was set because there was a program that was supposed to start mid-year but was late in starting. So if it's an overall contract for the mobile integrated health, what was that new piece that was added on mid-year that was worth that much money?
We can get that breakdown and bring it back.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, that would be great, because, as you said, it was a complete contract, but yet there's new components to it this year. So I would love to understand exactly what that is.
New last year.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. But the mobile integrated health program was not new last year. That's been one that's been going year over year, but there seems to be a new component within it.
That's right.
And so that is the new spend that I would be interested in understanding more about. Thanks, Chair. I'm good.
Good. Shall the section carry?
Carry.
Long-term care appropriations provided for operation of the 9 provincially owned manors. Administration, $1,585,800. Equipment, $218,700. Material, supplies, and services, $7,087,100. Professional services, $370,700. Salaries, $69,926,400. Travel and training, $316,100. Grants, $676,000. total long-term care, $80,180,800. Mermaid Stratford.
Thank you, Chair. So this is for the privately run long-term care facilities. And one of the things that when we had the department come in to speak to us, they spoke a lot about inspections. And so I see that we've spent an additional $3.5 million, and we're going to continue that spend. Is that increase in funding an increase to the contract in total, or is there?
Mermaid Stratford.
Sorry, yes, I'm in the wrong. Oh, I see. There it is. Okay, well, I will continue with that question. Same idea. Inspections within our public system. That increase in funding, is that just basically the increase in salaries, or would that increase inspections and that kind of thing as well?
The increase in this section relates to liability insurance increased requirements. It relates to materials and supplies for food, medical, and surgical supplies, etc. The majority of it relates to salaries, which are collective agreement increases. There's additional staffing for nursing supports, which is the start of November this year, 2022, for 13 RCW positions.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And so we've talked about human resource shortages in the past, and we are aware that there's shortages within our publicly run long-term care homes as well. And so, but we haven't, I don't see an overspend or an underspend in those, well, about $2 million over last year. So again, is that difference made up of, overtime and additional costs when you are trying to maintain a workforce that has shortages?
When you look at the salaries, I believe is where you're pointing to.
Yes.
It's in relation to the COVID response, where we required additional staffing to support visitations, enhanced cleaning, and care. It also was in support of standing up and supporting the Rosedale site accordingly.
Okay.
Those are the primary reasons.
Mermaid Stratford.
Okay, thanks, Chair. And do we do travel nurses in this section as well? That same program where we would have...
There's no forecast for those within the section, but it's certainly, if there was a demand or ask, it would be reviewed accordingly.
Okay,
Mermaid Stratford.
thanks. And just another, so when you deal with shortages, which, we've gone down to basic care with our residents living in long-term care from having, a more robust standard of care, which is what we saw last year and which we reported to the standing committee. So I'm trying to understand the impact on salary. So we would probably be paying more overtime in salaries, would we not, if we were trying to accommodate those staffing shortages? And how is that reflected in the salaries? Because what you just described is COVID impacts, right? But we know that we have regular impacts to salary because of the shortages and nurses working short a lot. So I'm just kind of trying to balance out the difference in the salaries line based on that.
Just reviewing to see if I have an overtime value with me right now. I can bring back the overtime value as it relates to long-term care. I don't have that level of detail with me. I just have the overall salary and what that makes up.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And just trying to make sure Do you have anybody on your list? Okay, if you want to come back to me, that'd be great.
O'Leary and Burness?
Okay, just, I know we've debated this a few times just on empty beds in the system. When I look at the salaries issue, you really have no increase in salaries. I'm assuming that would just be the normal wage increases. And so I know there's 1,268 beds that we fund. Half of them are public and half of them are long. Can you give me an indication how many are sitting empty now? Save you asking it during question period.
And as I've said, responded to you, member, it does vary from, but it's 103 beds at this point that are not open.
Wow.
O'Leary and Burness?
And yeah, I should categorize that as well. Of those 103, there's 40 in the private sector, 63 in the public sector.
Okay,
to give that break.
Yeah, much appreciated. Would any of those beds be respite beds? Or are they included in that? Because that's another issue that I'm running into in my district, that the respite beds. I think there's one respite bed. I asked this question to the legislature too, and to verify a little bit, but there is respite bed that's operational, but nobody is in it. Yeah. Because some of the policies that were implemented around respite because of COVID have restricted that from happening. But the reality is there's families out there that are having a difficult time. Do you have a sense on when those respite beds will be opened? Like I say, right now, there's none of them operational.
Yeah. So I guess as I hear from the honourable member, there's two parts to that question. Are the respite beds included in this? And secondly, timeline on when, when those respite beds may be open again. So I can't say with certainty. So for both of those, we'll bring back the information on that.
O'Leary and Burness?
The other question I have, and I know this would be a standard, but under the comfort allowance for our public long-term care, you have basically the same budget as last year. You spent more, like quite a bit more than last year, yet you've got no extra beds. So I'm kind of going with some assumptions that you're probably not even going to get some of those open. Is that the rationale why you spent more last year versus what you're proposing to spend this year? And I guess my other issue on that was I think there was a lot of talk about trying to increase that comfort allowance, so that would indicate to me that there's not going to be an increase. So $676,000 is budgeted for comfort allowance in our public facilities. I guess my ultimate question is there any policy change in this, or is the expectation there's no increase, but you're going to not need as much money because you're not going to have as many beds open?
The budget for the 22-23 fiscal year is the same as the 21-22. The forecast within the 21-22 was just slightly higher. And when we look at that comfort allowance, it's any subsidized resident qualifies and receives that value. So it can differ slightly depending upon the individual that is within that bed. So that is why it could differ slightly, but it's something that's very closely monitored.
Okay.
O'Leary and Burness?
Okay, I guess that's it for now.
Mermaid Stratford?
Thanks, Chair. So right now, we have the highest percentage for private long-term care beds. Do we have any plan in order to open up any more public beds or look at that ratio in the near, like basically in the near future?
That's under capital budget, member.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So you had just said that there's about 103 beds that are not being used currently. So of those beds that are not being used, so are you now no longer accepting patients into certain homes and because of staffing ratios? And how many homes would be impacted by not accepting additional patients because of low staffing?
I don't have the details as it relates to those numbers, but I can say that information that I had towards the end of March, the beds were really across the island. It wasn't one specific facility or manor.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. So my understanding is that staff have been told that they won't be receiving additional residents because of staffing ratio issues. And so how long will that go on for before accepting more residents? I've heard that from at least 2 public facility homes. So based on that, when do you expect that staffing ratios will be at a level in which we'll be actually able to accept more residents into them?
My response would be it's monitored every day. When we look at some of those beds, it's staffing, but some is in relation to, a lot of it is in relation to COVID. So we're hoping that as we move forward that
right.
our staffing in that relation wouldn't be as much of an issue. So it's monitored very closely. I don't have a date for you.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. So of those 103 beds, are you saying that those beds are empty because of COVID?
I'm saying it's a combination of staffing and again, when I'm looking at a report that is dated March 31st, some of it was due to outbreaks in facilities.
Okay.
Mermaid Stratford.
Thanks, Chair. And I understand a number of outbreaks have cleared up recently, but we've hit a peak in the number of long-term care homes that have had outbreaks. Do you have the impact on like the COVID guidelines? One thing that we talked about in the standing committee was how those guidelines are being implemented to ensure isolation protocols are being followed, and if somebody's in the same room as somebody who tests COVID positive, that they could be isolated from that person so that they're safe. Do you have you allocated funding in order to in order to make sure that you will be able to isolate and residents when required? And obviously, if we have that many beds open, that potentially we have more space that we can actually do isolation protocols with. So are we following those guidelines and ensuring that residents can be isolated when needed?
As it relates to the budget, health PEI, just as I discussed in other sections, if there's a need for funding to support our COVID response, we would make an application for those resources accordingly.
Mermaid Stratford.
I'm good for now, Chair.
Tyne Valley Sherbrooke.
Thank you, Chair. So just to follow up on that, so in terms of making an application for additional resources that might be needed due to COVID isolation and additional capacity due to COVID issues, I'm wondering where the evidence of that need or possible need is reflected in the budget, because it looks like there's been a drastic decrease in the amount of funding available to address issues around COVID. So can you explain how you can be certain that there's that flexibility there, that if long-term care homes, private long-term care homes need additional support due to COVID outbreaks, that it will be there next year?
So when we look at the forecast, specifically for 21-22, you can see that the grand total of 80.53 million is greater than the budget of 77.1. And when we look at that overall, for that forecast, it included additional staff and visitation and cleaning of almost 1.5 million, and an outbreak response funding of over 420. In addition to that, personal protective equipment funding of over 350,000.
For 21-22.
Pardon me?
Sorry, for
Time
that was for
Valley Sherbrooke.
sorry, Chair, for 21-22. Okay. And so for 22-23, what are we preparing to provide in terms of supports related to COVID?
We would be looking, of course, at what was needed last year, and based on the guidelines provided by CPHO, they determine what those needs would be, and we would monitor that accordingly. We would estimate what those costs would be for the year, and we would seek approval through Treasury Board to access COVID contingency funds accordingly.
Time Valley Sherbrooke.
And has there been any estimation made to date of what you expect might be needed for 22-23 for long-term care supports for COVID-related things?
Not as of today, but that work will be ongoing over the coming weeks.
Time Valley Sherbrooke.
Okay. That is surprising for me to hear, because COVID is not over, right? Especially for seniors in long-term care, right? They're one of the most vulnerable populations that we have when it comes to COVID, and we've seen that, sadly, most recently here on PEI, with the majority of deaths due to COVID have been in senior populations, and very, very drastically across the country, we've seen, particularly in private long-term care homes, that there's been a disproportionate impact on seniors who live in private long-term care. That's not specific to PEI, but across Canada, we've seen that. So it is disconcerting as we're looking at a budget for the coming year to know that those conversations haven't yet happened, and that we just have to trust that in a couple of weeks you're going to start figuring out what that might cost. I'm sure that's not very reassuring to families who have loved ones in long-term care.
Good question, member.
Yeah, so it's not, I'm sorry.
Time
are we
Valley
laughing
Sherbrooke,
about
you have
this?
the floor.
apparently that must be funny.
You know what, I don't have a question here, but we're talking about people's lives, and just because they're
Charlottetown
seniors
West
doesn't
Royalty.
mean their lives don't matter, so.
Just wondering, how many dementia beds are at PE Home? And are any of the 103 beds not being used? Are they dementia beds at PE Home?
$72.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
72 dementia beds at PE Home. How many restorative care beds at PE Home? You're not going to find any. I don't think there is any. Never mind. That's part of the problem. There was a restorative care wing, and they became dementia beds. So, are all the 72 beds being used at PE Home? That's an awful lot of. The whole PE Home Center it's in my district. It wasn't really supposed to be. It was supposed to be a restorative care wing, general, and so is that number? Is there any room for that? Is that number going to stabilize? Are we looking at a reduction in dementia beds, or what's in the future for PE Home? Yes.
I don't have any information with me today
Details
about
back.
a plan for changes for the beds for PE Home.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
Okay, yeah, I'd like that. So Out of the 103 beds are are there 60 public beds? Are all the beds used at PE Home and Beach Grove Home?
What we will do is bring back, with regard to both 63 public and the 40 private, breakdown by facility member.
Charlottetown West Royalty.
And my last question, the member from O'Leary and Vanessa talked about it, and I asked you questions about it, but I think I asked the Minister of Social Development about the comfort allowance, and I just wanted to say, Minister, that number hasn't moved, and I'm hearing from people that needed to move, the cost of living is up, so I just kind of wanted to, I've asked you questions in the legislature, or vice versa, so I think that if there's room at all in the budget, that's an important number for people living. That's been directly brought to me.
Appreciate that.
Serious. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Charlottetown Brighton.
Yeah, I was wondering if you...
The hour has been called. It's been asked to extend the hour. Do we have unanimous consent?
No.
Mr. Chair, I move that the Speaker take the chair and that the chair report progress and beg leave to sit again.
Shall it carry? Mr. Speaker, as Chair of a Committee of the Whole House, having had under consideration the grant is applied to Her Majesty, I beg leave to report that the committee has made some progress and begs leave to sit again. I move that the report of the committee be adopted.
Shall it carry? The Honourable Member from Montague, Kilmuir, and the Government Whip.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the member from Cornwall Meadowbank, that this House now adjourn until Thursday, April 21st at 1:00 p.m.
Shall it carry? See everyone on the 21st.